So just the other day after I edited and posted the last post or whatever, the commentary, I realized there was another crop circle. This time it was like in a poppy field, which was, I guess, kind of rare, but that's kind of cool. It's just 4 dots. And it just makes me think, even though I don't want to over analyze it, although that's pretty much what I do. But 4 times 24 is 96. Just makes me think of that. Because, I mean, this is this was the anniversary of the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947. But again, not to over numerologize, but it's like, what's the point, in worrying about it when I pretty much analyze the numerology of things? But this post, The Supreme Secret of the Illuminati, there's a few chapters, or at least there's this chapter, and then there's this. And so it's a little bit of reading, but it's like peak full moon right now. And so I wanted to just focus on this. And 96 being related essentially to the third eye, or the Ajna Chakra. It's made me think of a lot of things, just analyzing the connections. And I'll try to go into that as I go. But just to keep in mind, Crowley's book on geomancy, Liber Gaius, the handbook of geomancy, is 96 because there's 96 total points essentially in the geomantic figures. 96 is also essentially 3 32s. The I Ching is 64, which is 2 32s. The Tree of Life itself being 32 based with the 10 Sephiroth and 22 paths. They're somewhat I wouldn't say they're all tied together necessarily, but it's important to keep track, I guess, of these little pantheons or systems. Stephen Skinner has a book, he has the Oracle of Geomancy and then also Terrestrial Astrology. And it goes into the depth of geomancy, but also this Sikidi from Madagascar. And just in general, the African 16-based system is 96 divided by 16. There's it makes me think of the hexagrams being 6-based, but also kind of 16, or really 8x8, 64. But and Kenneth Grant doesn't really talk about it, but it makes me think also how 96, again, going back to the formula of reversion or inversion or reflection, no, he never talks about the triple DNA, triple alien or triple stranded alien DNA, although that's mentioned in, I think, the Crabwood Crop Circle, which again was 2002, and that's when the Ninth Arch came out. And again, it's got some weird properties in it. Whether or not these crop circles are being done by if they're done by humans, the timing involved is synchronistic, and again, it could be intentional, in which case then they know about certain things and there's kind of evidence, or there's again this synchromistic hyperdimensional overlay, which seems to be increasingly the case. But 69 is 323s, so it just makes me think of that, and how Adam being 46, well, 80 AM at least, but then reflected is 64, which is Adam in Hebrew, ADM, and Eve. And this whole reflection mystery, and just various ways it comes up symbolically, but also almost literally. Just, it's weird. He mentions how 69 is Absu, essentially, ABSU, which is kind of like the abyss. See, he even says the abyss. But then Abizu, this is the importance of having a gematria database, but Abizu is 96. Ibizu, which is, again, similar to um, Lilith, mentioned in 94. But so keeping all that in mind, it's just funny in the verse on 96, though, in the Ninth Arch, he ends up mentioning the Tuawi, Toyoi. I forgot how they said to pronounce it, but Toei stone, Tuaoi, the crystal energy device, abuse of which was said to have resulted in the destruction of Atlantis. And again, Edgar Casey territory. That's what this really references. Um, but it makes me think again of what I, for lack of a better term, summarize as gray alien technology, just to lump it all together. But yet Atlantis, using simple gematria, is 96, and then so 16. What was the other one? Oh, hydrogen, which ties in with 96. When I think of it, it brings to mind the Uspensky thing about Gurdjieff's and like these laws, essentially. 96 being the moon, which is like the last order. Um, but he ends up linking it to hydrogen, essentially, which has just to do with the periodic table. Um, these reflective numbers happen to be called strobogrammatic, which just means whirling or spinning, the ability to spin. And I mentioned, like in the last post, the sort of webbing or Indra's net sort of thing of births and birthdays and death, and then significant events also. But 916 came to mind because of the fact, like, my dad's birthday is 916, and then his basically friend's grandson, like her daughter's first son, was the same birthday, and my dad like thought it was significant. But I told him, I was like, well, my best friend's birthday also is 916. This was like when I was a kid. And then Nima, who I actually was able to contact, Nima and Ajna, or Maggie Margaret Ingalls. Nima happens to be 96, it comes to mind. But her birthday was 916. And it's come up in other ways, but it's like that's where it's you're not even looking for it. It just pops out and then it accumulates. And so then it's not like you do look for it. It stands out more when it comes up again. Um, but again, I didn't know that this figure number set had a name. Uh, but they even cite 69, 96, 1001. So really, I want to get into this post because it's a lot to read, but I did want to mention that. And then, real quick, I had found an interview of Raymond Fowler because I've been trying to go through his books, and really all of what they connect to, because he was actually a MUFON investigator for a while. Anyway, he mentions the triple numbers, and just he has a book that came out called Synchrophile about it, which is just yet another thing I'll have to look into later. But he loosely touches upon it, and so does she with 1111 and 111. But again, as much as people, and this has been known in like a phenomena that's been identified by different classes of investigators, there's never a mention to the depth of the history of the Kabbalah of Nine Chambers. Um, what else was? Oh yeah, and then I found this original document by Mike Cleland, the guy who really kind of focuses on the owl connection, at least in many popularized videos of interviews and stuff. But he has a book called The Messengers, I think. Yeah, The Messengers. And it was surprising to find how much he talked about 333. And I forgot what else. So yeah, in the Andreasen Fair Phase 2, Scott Rogo is mentioned, and just this whole relationship between the mind and the UFO and whatnot. And it's definitely uh, like again, I think of so many different subjects in regard to it. One that I kind of, because so many different subjects are like take a lot of, you kind of have to dive into them, and then you almost forget about or lose interest in others, and you have to redevelop it. But the Sergei O. Prokofiev book, The Heavenly Sophia and the being anthroposophia, the incarnation of Sophia in human form, I guess. The Heavenly Sophia, and as much as Sophia connects to just different aspects that I was studying pretty much from like post 64 through 81, the whole concept in Hinduism of the goddess and how that fuses with certain esoteric forms of Buddhism. Um, with the Kanda Maharoshana Tantra was really eye opening, but also the teachings of Kubjika, the Kubjika Upanishad, um, also the Sarva Durgati Parisodhana Tantra, and like all these different texts and tantras kind of go into this nature of reality as a womb, essentially. Again, prajna paramita is what the word I was trying to sift through all those things to get back to. But like Edward Kahns mentions the similarity, or wrote about really the similarity between Sophia and prajna paramita. Essentially, one's Gnostic and sort of Western in a sense in origin, and then prajna paramita, the perfection of wisdom, essentially, but also, again, the phrase perfection of insight itself, which I found through reading Alex Wayman's books. Uh, perfection of insight. And so, again, the 666 formula being 6 times 6 and being implying 36, which 1 through 36 is 666, ties a lot into the Kashmir Shaivism system. Um, and so just seeing this overlap and letting that all sink in, and with it, like over time, and reading these things, and then just again, without even trying, certain phrases or words, single words, or sometimes it's a phrase like perfection of insight, highlight in my own mind. Like it's like in developing a sort of skill through calculating, you can sort of see when they appear, or they just highlight, and then you get like curious and calculate it, and then it's like a shocking feeling. That's why, like me talking about them, it's like they're mnemonic devices. Like I've said, they help memorize things or just stay like they come to mind and flash in your mind. But then, like I've said, they can unlock previously unknown organizations, whether they're gematria, like organizations of codes, or sometimes they're pure symbol, like in other forms of symbolic, uh, morphogrammatic systems, essentially, even other languages, like it transcends that. And so that's why what I had mentioned, it's a lot to go into, but this whole plasma theory, and I had mentioned a Hindu text, which now that it's easier, I was just organizing them, and so it's the Sri Matrika Chakra Viveka, and this book really goes into, even though it's complicated, and you'd have to have a somewhat of a background in the theory, but it's almost like a Sanskrit Kabbalistic understanding of um, mantras and how they apply, essentially, and vibrate into like more, uh, not morphogenetic, but there's another word, but formation, essentially. So again, that's why like there's different fields. Some of them are ancient, like Samkhya, and just they provide insight and access to this stuff that otherwise is almost impossible to understand. But again, I wanted to go into that. There's more I want to go into, but hopefully I can like tie it in, because it usually ties in. So this book or this post, The Supreme Secret of the Illuminati, posted September 14th, 2016. If you're expecting to find celebrity entertainment and gossip, look elsewhere, because Hollywood and the mass media are as far from the illumined adepts and their ageless wisdom as you can get. The word Illuminati, originating primarily from the Bavarian order of Adam Weishaupt, has largely been greatly bastardized and misaligned with what has been termed the obscuranti, or those whose work is to obscure rather than reveal the truth. Here I will continue, as I have done in this publication, to elucidate the actual wisdom being kept from the vulgar and ignorant masses, who would largely prefer to stay focused on the pointless bread and circus charades of actors and clowns. Having surveyed as many books and sources as possible to try and find just how popular Kabbalah and Gematria were in the past among those in the know, again, in the Illuminati is 666, the architects, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Illuminists, etc., and I have found certain particular sources that show indeed it was a central element in each, albeit largely unused or ignored, even by the majority of members, and certainly the general public as well, and also being demonized and forbidden by the church as a form of divination or sorcery. This knowledge was made public as far back as the late 1800s, if not sooner, as illustrated in the canon by William Sterling in 1897. See Chapter 3, the Kabbalah in particular, which specifically relates that this knowledge was in fact common among the Church Fathers, and that the number 666 is not only the number of the beast's name, but also the number of God. That is, it is a number which God hath pleased to name and reveal to men, that by counting of this number they might find out that other number which it pleased not God expressly to name in this place, but rather mystically to conceal, etc. So in chapter 3 of the Kabbalah, it says, the Jews, in imitation of the Pythagorean institutes, made the Kabbalah their codex or canon law. Court of the Gentiles, volume 3, page 216. The Church of Rome persisted obstinately in affirming, though not always with the same imprudence and plainness of speech, that the Holy Scriptures were not composed for the use of the multitude, but only for that of their spiritual teachers. Mosheim, An Ecclesiastical History, Ancient and Modern, from the Birth of Christ to the Beginning of the Present Century, 1811. Volume 2, Section 3, Chapter 1, page 25. In order that what follows may be better understood, we must now attempt to elucidate the principal doctrines of the Kabbalah. This singular work is known to have formed an important part of the Masonic traditions, and undoubtedly contains the nearest approach to a direct revelation of the ancient canonical secrets of the Old World. And however obscure it may be, those parts which are intelligible provide us with a few fundamental facts, which are indisputably the basis of the old esoteric philosophy. The books of the Kabbalah which have come down to us are said to have been first written by Simeon ben Yochai at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, and afterwards expanded by his disciples. Mr. Mathers, in the introduction to his translation of the Zohar, tells us that the mysterious science of the Kabbalah was said to have been communicated by angels to Adam after his fall. From Adam it passed to Noah and the patriarchs. Moses, who was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, was first initiated into the Kabbalah in the land of his birth, but became most proficient in it during his wanderings in the wilderness, where he not only devoted to it the leisure hours of the whole 40 years, but received lessons in it from one of the angels. Although statements of this kind are merely philosophic fictions, we may safely accept the antiquity of the Kabbalah as being very great. The legends of its origin are not made without a purpose, for underneath their fictitious terms a truth is concealed. For instance, the communication of the Kabbalah was said to be coeval with the fall, because this event, allegorically understood, symbolizes the transmission of the mystical doctrine as an emblem of the divine essence or life existing in the universe. The Kabbalah was the emblem of the soul of the world, and as all human art was created in the imitation of nature, the secret tradition symbolized the individual. The secret tradition symbolized the invisible soul, which inspired the letter of the scriptures. And since it was a postulate of the philosophers that the tradition or passage of the spirit or soul of God from heaven to earth was effected through the zodiac and 7 planets, so they alleged that the Kabbalah was transmitted through the mouths of the patriarchs and the Messiah Christos, who personified the planetary system. According to the old cosmic arrangement, the universe consisted of 3 stages: the Imperium, the 7 planets, and the Earth in the center. This order we may call God, the universe, and man. And the Kabbalistic steps or degrees embracing these 3 divisions may be said to express the hypothetical agency through which the spirit flowed down to earth, and was first incarnated in the human body of the hypothetical creature Adam. The Kabbalistic theology, representing the endless reasoning of countless generations of ingenious men, is the epitome of man's first efforts to grasp the problems connected with the cause and continuance of life, the inscrutable mystery which has baffled the understanding of all inquirers alike. They reasoned concerning all the phenomena of existence by their analogy to human creation, and it was supposed that the universal creation took place after the manner of human creation, and that the generative attributes of a man and a woman were those of God and the universe, and finally that all the bodily functions of a human being had their counterpart in the macrocosm or greater world. The theoretical system based upon these ideas constituted the secret doctrine, which was taught orally and was never written. All the old canonical writings are an exposition of its teaching, but these works are composed so that only those persons who are instructed in the rules of the hidden wisdom could discover their meaning. There was a mystical doctrine taught in all the old schools of philosophy. In the case of the Pythagoreans, a long and severe period of probation was required on the part of an aspirant before the ultimate truths of the system were communicated. Although the true interpretations of the Jewish law depends upon a knowledge of these Kabbalistic mysteries, it is possible that not a single human being at the present day understands their meaning or application. Manasseh ben Israel, a Jewish writer at the beginning of the 17th century, has recorded some valuable observations on this mystical science, and has given the 13 rules for practical use in interpreting the myths of the prophets. He says, God delivered to Moses the written law, and the commentary called the oral law. The latter was to be retained mentally and to be transmitted by tradition. It is therefore termed Kabbalah, received. Accordingly, the 2 texts, Exodus 34:27, are presumed to allude to the 2 laws so denominated, from one being an exposition of the other. All the known languages of the world, excepting the Hebrew only, owe their origin to human construction and art, but the Hebrew had the Lord for its author and framer, and is thence called the Holy Tongue, as it proceeded from that consummate wisdom which is infinite. Each word in itself contains the profoundest mysteries. For which reason R. Simeon ben Yochai says in the Zohar, "Woe to him who imagines that the law only contains the superficial structure of its narration, and he who supposes it has no soul comprised within its veiled mysteries has no portion in the world to come. Its body only," he continues, "the ignorant enjoy, but sages, who are the gifted servants of the sublime and most high King, look to its soul as its superior portion, and others, still more learned, to the soul of that soul. The least instructed are those who occupy themselves in the endeavor to learn how things happen according to the literal record. These are rewarded for their pious application, although they do not properly understand it, yet acquire salvation by virtue of their good intention. Others employ themselves in studying the explanations of the precepts and ceremonies, that is, knowledge of the Mishnah, called by some the oral law, from having been formerly retained in the memory of sages and conveyed verbally to their disciples. And lastly, many aspire to the highest contemplation of the mysteries contained in the words, letters, points, and musical accents used in the construction of the text of the law. R. Simeon ben Yochai termed the first of these masters of the reading, the second masters of the second or double lecture, and the third masters of the Kabbalah, that is, of tradition or the received, it being an explanation of the divine law received from the mouth of God by Moses, revealed by him to the sages or elders, and by them handed down to posterity. As Moses was 120 days on the mount, on 3 different occasions of 40 days each, it is highly probable he learned them all during these 3 studies, dedicating 40 days to each, and as all beginnings are the most difficult, he was gradually prepared, and rendered capable of attaining the highest contemplation of the Kabbalah. In the same period of 40 days as he had employed in mastering the lesser ones, from being thus gradually instructed. Hence it may be understood what Kabbalah is and how it is divided into 2 parts. A demonstration will now be attempted for the information of the curious as to the means employed by the Kabbalists to discover the highest mysteries of the law. They have 13 methods of discovering the mystery they attribute to the whole law in a logical sense, and the secret meaning of its words. Brief examples of these rules will clearly explain their nature. The second rule is called transposition, that is, the letters of a word being transposed and joined different ways from various words. This rule also seems to be derived from Scripture, as it says in Genesis, Noah found grace in the sight of the Lord. The letters in the name Noah, essentially Nun Cheth, being transposed form Cheth Nun, grace. By this change, the numerical value of the word becomes 708 instead of 58. The third rule is called gematria, or numeration, and is performed by numbers, being a mathematical mode of comprehending the scripture. For as the Hebrew letters are numerals, they contain everything, Pythagoras said. God created the world by numbers, as did Plato. See question 71. So the word Bereshith amounts numerically to the same as Yetzirah, Beth Torah, or Batorah. He formed the law, thus drawing the conclusion that the law was the instrumental cause of the creation of the world. To this question, why does the law begin with a B or Beth? They answer, to signify the 2 laws, the written and oral, or justice and mercy, and similar things. This rule is used in different modes as explained in Pardes Riamonim. They often add a unit to the amount of the letters in a word which is called kolel. As to the word covenant, numerically 612, they add this kolel, making it 613, saying this word signifies the law, which contains 613 precepts. This mystery of numbers also appears stated in Holy Writ. For in the case of the idolatrous priests of Baal, who accepted Elijah's challenge, it says that Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the sons of Jacob. His taking this number for the special purpose of invoking the Lord was not merely that 12 was the number of Israel's sons, but because those sons were 12 in consequence of that special number in Scripture covering a profound mystery. The Talmudists also use this rule in various passages in the Talmud, and modern authors much more so, as R. Solomon Molko, R. Jacob ben Habib, R. Mordecai, R. Sabbatai, and others, deducing great mysteries therefrom. In Conciliator Volume 1, page 206. These statements are corroborated by Diodorus, who says, "The Chaldeans preserve their learning within themselves by a continued tradition from father to son." The Christian equivalent to the word Kabbalah was gnosis, knowledge, and from innumerable references in the writings of the fathers, it is evident that the new sect in the construction of the gospel and ritual of the church perpetuated the same mystical tradition which they had received from the Hebrews. The nature of the knowledge is explicitly stated by Clement of Alexandria in the following words: "And the gnosis itself is that which has descended by transmission to a few, having been imparted unwritten by the apostles." Miscellaneous, Book 4, Chapter 7. St. Basil also alludes to it thus: "They, the fathers, were well instructed to preserve the veneration of the mysteries by silence. For how could it be proper publicly to proclaim in writing the doctrine of those things which no unbaptized person may so much as look upon?" De Spiritu Sancto, c. 27. From expressions of this kind, it becomes apparent that the importance attached to the unbroken continuity of the apostolic succession was due to the necessity for securing the transmission of the oral tradition, or gnosis, unimpaired, in order that the true interpretation of the gospel might be ensured to succeeding generations. The works of Irenaeus, Hippolytus, and Epiphanius have numerous references to the Gnostic practices of the Christians, and particularly to the Kabbalistic process of gematria. The fact that the numerical system of the Kabbalists and Gnostics is generally condemned by the Fathers appears to be no more than a priestly artifice, intended to deceive the vulgar, and prevent inquisitive people from prying too deeply into the mysteries, which were retained as the exclusive property of the few, referred to by St. Clement. That the Greek philosophy rested upon the same secret tradition which was accepted and retained as the basis of the Christian theology, in common with other religious and philosophical systems, seems to be borne out by another passage from the Miscellanies. Peter says in his preaching, "Know that there is one God, who made all things by the word of his power, that is, according to the Gnostic scripture, his Son." Then he adds, "Worship this God not as the Greeks," signifying plainly that the excellent among the Greeks worshipped the same God as we, but that they had not learned by perfect knowledge that which was delivered by the Son. Do not then worship, he did not say the God whom the Greeks worship, but as the Greeks, changing the manner of the worship of God, not announcing another God. Neither worship as the Jews, for they, thinking that they only know God, do not know him, adoring as they do angels and archangels, the months and the moon, for what belonged to the Greeks and the Jews is old. But we who worship him in a new way, in the third form, are Christians. Miscellanies 6, chapter 5. Theophilus Gale, one of the most learned Puritans of the 17th century, says that the Jews, in imitation of the Pythagorean institutes, made the Kabbalah their codex or canon law. Court of the Gentiles, Volume 3, page 216. And again on page 217, he repeats, "As for the Jewish Kabbalah or Kabbalistic mythology, it seems to me exactly framed in imitation of the Grecian mythology and symbolic mode of philosophizing. It's true the Jewish church had, even from its first institution, its choicest mysteries delivered in symbols, parables, enigmas, and other terrene shadows. He speaks further of the Jewish Talmud, or systems of traditions called the oral law, which he says the Jews equalize unto, prefer before the scriptures. For they say, just as the papists of their traditions, that we cannot arrive at a perfect explanation of the divine precepts, but by the traditions of the ancients. Again, that without the oral law, the whole written law is wrapped up in darkness. This is corroborated by Lightfoot, probably the most competent rabbinical scholar of the English Church, who declares that the Jews venerate the oral law as the foundation of the written law, and scruple not to say, the words of the elders are weightier than the words of the prophets. The Jews were not the only people who possessed a mystical tradition, for the Neoplatonists of the Alexandrian school claimed to have a sacred succession by which the inner doctrines of the school were received and perpetuated. The Christians also had their gnosis, said to have been received from Christ, by whom it was transmitted to the apostles, and successively to the heads of the churches. St. Clement declared that the barbarian scriptures were all symbolical, and to be understood required an interpreter and guide, for they considered that, receiving truth from those who knew it well, we should be more earnest and less liable to deception. In speaking of his own tenets, he says in Book 5, Chapter 10, rightly, therefore, the divine apostle says, by revelation the mystery was made known to me. For without a guide or interpreter to reveal the meaning of the scriptures, the mysteries are hidden and dark. Such a revelation was given by St. John. Only his revelation is as obscure as the parable which it is supposed to lay bare. A plain explanation of the gospel was handed down by oral tradition only, as St. Clement intimates, for fear of the swinish and untrained hearers. Even now I fear, as it is said, to cast pearls before swine, lest they tread them under foot and turn and rend us. For scarcely could anything which they would hear be more ludicrous than those to the multitude. Miscellanies, Book 1, Chapter 1. Thus, without disguise, he gives the reason why the mysteries of faith are not to be divulged to all. All old philosophers and priests, Christian or otherwise, had the same dread of the vulgar and profane, and had the same motive for concealing their mystical doctrine from the people, namely, lest it should be turned into ribaldry. It is explicitly stated by Mosheim in An Ecclesiastical History, Ancient and Modern, from the Birth of Christ to the Beginning of the Present Century, to page 57, that the religion of Rome is derived according to the unanimous accounts of its doctors from two sources, the written word of God and the unwritten, or in other words, from scripture and tradition. By the apostolic succession, the true elucidation of the mysterious wisdom of the gospel was secured, and presumably is still retained in the unreformed churches. After the Reformation, the Protestants discarded the original traditions of the Church, and eventually ceased to regard the papal authority received uninterruptedly from St. Peter as being of paramount importance. Thus, the teaching of the traditions having been dropped, the veneration of the Pope, as the representative of the apostolic succession, gradually lapsed, and the traditional knowledge entrusted to him has ceased to be known. Whether any part of the gnosis alluded to by St. Clement is still received and transmitted by the modern popes cannot be easily discovered. But judging from the papal nervousness at present exhibited toward Freemasonry, it may be surmised that some faint remnant of the ancient knowledge is, even now, in the keeping of the Vicar of Christ. The reason why His Holiness has declared the ordination of the Reformed Church of England to be invalid is presumably because the Protestants, when they broke with the Church, declined to acknowledge or teach the unwritten word. And I didn't mention it in the last post, but I was looking into just connections with 95, and the 95 theses of Martin Luther came up. but I didn't really find any connection until I just again considered the simple gematria values of 95 and saw it was Halloween, which that's the day he nailed the theses to that door. It wasn't like worth mentioning, but it just came to mind. As the practice of gematria defined by Manasseh, this must have been OCR translated, if I typed it by hand, I did a bad job. But Manasseh ben Israel will be constantly used throughout the present work. The following instances will explain the method of its application in the works of the philosophers. In Hebrew, the word Torah, the law, and Adonai, the bride, whose name was generally used as a substitute for the Tetragrammaton, or Yod-He-Vav-He, Yahweh essentially, have each the numerical value of 671. Therefore, by the rule of gematria, they have the same signification. In Greek, paradisos has the same numerical value and is equivalent by gematria of, or to, O cosmos. 670 plus 1 being 671, and cosmos being numerically equal to 600 implies the number 1040, which is the radius of the sphere of the zodiac contained within the holy oblation for a vesica 600 broad is 1040 long. Macrocosmos 831 was the name given to the Father, or the first three steps forming the upper triad of the Kabbalah. These three steps form a triangle at the crown of the diagram, and pyramis, a pyramid or triangle, has also the value of 831. By gematria, these two words are equivalent to phallus, 831, and according to the proportion of the figure of Caesarino, 831 multiplied by 9.5 gives the height of a man stretched crosswise in a square enclosing a circle, 7,899 in diameter, or the length of the polar diameter of the Earth measured by British miles. Again, he gnosis, or the gnosis, is 1,271, and staros, a cross, have each the same numerical value. Therefore, the gnosis of the Christians may be said to be the knowledge of the cross. Telitai, 651, one of the names applied to the Greek mysteries, yields the same number as episteme, science, and 651 is the diameter of a circle 2046 in circumference, and 2046 is the diameter of Saturn's orbit, measured by the diameter of the Sun. Therefore, both the mystic rites and the science of the Greek religion signified the knowledge of the cosmos. And it just makes me think kind of how, again, I should have brought it up in the last one, but just to say 95 relates as the mass of Saturn is 95 times that of Earth. Makes me think of that. But I mean, 96, again, is a very terrestrial Malkuthian number. In fact, it's the root of Malku, reign, exercise of kingly power, kingdom, and realm. And so 96, it kind of reflects both the above and the below, again, with this hydrogen law of the octaves of matter, essentially. But then the fact that there's 96 petals of the Ajna chakra, generally considered two. There's like, it's normally just mentions that there's two. But if you read the Shiva Samhita, once it gets to verse 96, it gets to the Ajna chakra. But there's different books that mention how it's 96 and what that kind of relates to. In this sort of analysis by Ledbetter, it mentions like 960 and how that essentially is just shy of the thousand petaled lotus, which really the Anya connects to as like connects to the Sahasrara and allows sort of sight, the insight of that uh, higher wisdom, essentially, which really seems to, the wisdom of it seems to be all about reflection, and not just reflection of numbers, but it makes me think of how on the Tree of Life, the supernal triad is reflected downward with, I forgot what it's called, but the middle triad, and then the third triad reflects that. And so essentially, again, once you approach Kether, it all folds back. Like it's all about everything folding back up. Anyway, it's it's difficult to discuss, but the fact he associates it with the five elements, the sixth sense, essentially. Um, I don't know. I just am fascinated by the Kashmir Shaivism system of the sixth sense being essentially ignited by the five elements in their development, essentially. So anyway, this thing about Saturn proportion made me think back to that. Therefore, both the mystic rites and the science of the Greek religion signified the knowledge of the cosmos. And Ecclesia, the church, who was called the spouse of Christ, again, the bride, Malku or Malka, is equivalent numerically to Rhodon, a rose, the emblem of the Rosicrucians, and was regarded by them as the antithesis of the cross. The doctrine of the Kabbalah was reduced to a geometrical diagram, in which the 10 steps were grouped according to a progressive scheme, so that the emanations of the spirit of the Elohim issues from the first step called the crown, and after passing through the whole figure is carried through the 9th step, and finally reaches the 10th or last of the series. The theory of the Kabbalah teaches that these 10 steps symbolize a trinity of persons, whose function consists in receiving and transmitting the spirit of life in its passage from heaven to earth. The first 3 steps shadow forth the first person of the Trinity called the long face, the macrocosm, or the Father. The next 6 steps are called or assigned to the small face, who is called the microcosm, the King or Son, the second person of the Trinity. The 10th and last step is personated by the third person called Malkuth, the bride or mother. Each of these 10 symbols is associated with one of the heavenly bodies, so that the whole diagram is an epitome of the image of the universe. The ideas which the ancients connected with these 3 persons combined into this figure of 10 progressive steps appear to form the basis of all their philosophy, religion, and art. And in it we have the nearest approach to a direct revelation of the traditional science or gnosis, which was never communicated except by myths and symbols. A very little knowledge is required to recognize the identity of the Kabbalistic doctrine with that of the Gospel, for the Christian Trinity is clearly derived from the geometrical disposition of the 10 steps. Kircher in Oedipus, Tom 2, Parse 1, page 289, has given one of the most complete illustrations of the diagram which is now available. And it is specially valuable from the fact that he has placed the symbols of the temple and its various parts, so that he makes the temple synonymous with the universe, and identifies its furniture with the 3 symbolical persons. The first 3 steps are attributed to the Imperium, while the 7 planets are comprised in those which are below, the 10th step being assigned to the moon in the sublunary world. So again, it's making me think of that 96 octave Uspensky talks about. It is thus apparent that the Father represents the supercelestial region, the Sun, the intermediate space occupied by the 7 planets, while the bride or mother is relegated to the 4 elements, which have the earth as their center. Consequently, we see in the scheme of the Hebrew philosophy that the deity, in whose image man's twofold body was formed, the temple and the cosmos, are one and synonymous. Although the only direct version of the Kabbalah which we possess is that of the Jews, it is absolutely certain that a similar oral tradition founded upon the same doctrine was current among the Greeks. All the early Christians who knew their Kabbalah declared that Plato had borrowed his ideas from Moses. Nor was Plato ignorant of that mystical symbol, the cross, which was a sacred emblem long before it emerged from obscurity in the first century. The allusion to the cross in the famous passage in the Timaeus has often been commented upon, and there can be no doubt that it prefigures the mythos which afterwards appeared in the Christian gospel. It is quite plain that Plato, in describing the demiurge or logos, compounded out of the zodiac, all the planets and the elements, is referred to the second and third persons of the Kabbalistic triad, whose bodies comprise the material universe. So again, the Ruach, which is also the solar system, but symbolized in the body as well, in the microcosm, and who were created in the image of the Elohim, male and female. This androgynous being, the creator, divided lengthwise into two parts, which he joined to one another at the center like the letter X, and bent them into a circular form, connecting them with themselves and each other at the point opposite their original meeting point. The two limbs of the cross symbolize the double sex of this heavenly creature, whom we find in the Apocalypse standing amidst the seven candlesticks or planets, or as the image of Daniel, and again as the man in Ezekiel's vision, and above all as Christos extending crosswise in the Holy Oblation. This was the cross which Constantine saw in the sky, and his conversation meant that he was enlightened and instructed in the Christian gnosis, and saw with his spiritual eye the crucified man stretched across the heavens, and believed in the verity of the visionary Christ. The letter Chi has the value of 600 as a numeral, so that it is the numerical equivalent to the word cosmos, and a vesica 600 wide is 1040 long, or the radius of the circle 2080 in diameter, which is contained in the Holy Oblation. The architect Cesarino, who edited an Italian translation of Vitruvius published in 1521, has drawn the two figures intended by Vitruvius to embody the proportions of temples, with an anatomical exactness not to be found elsewhere. The first glance at these two figures shows us that they are each disposed in the form of a cross. So these must be the notes, but Cornelius Agrippa in Occulta Philosophia, Paris, 1567, page 237, has depicted the figure of the microcosm standing within a circle on a quadrangular stone, with his arms stretched out to the circumference. In each hand is placed a five-pointed star, the emblem of the firmament. On page 238, he has represented the macrocosm in a square like the figure of Cesariano. Four symbols are drawn opposite the four extremities of the body: an eye above his head, at his right hand a serpent, at his left a staff and shield at his feet. There is another figure of the microcosm exactly resembling the lesser man of Cesariano, page 240. The square enclosing his body is surrounded by the 12 signs of the zodiac. There are also two other figures, pages 239 and 241, each drawn within a circle having one of the 7 planets corresponding to some member of their bodies. The man whose body forms the Jerusalem cross is relatively bigger than the other, whose limbs describe the St. Andrew's cross or saltire, their proportions being so arranged as to exemplify the duplication of the square. The square enclosing the greater man is divided horizontally and vertically into 30 parts, thus dividing the area into 900 small squares. His height being 96 digits, the perimeter of the square is 384 digits, the number of the soul of the world according to Plutarch. And if he were drawn within the holy oblation, then his body would extend through the 7 orbits of the planets to the sphere of the zodiac or fixed stars, and exactly resemble the figures of the macrocosm, which appear in the works of the mystic philosophers of the 17th century. The figure of the lesser man would occupy the square, whose area is half that of the holy oblation. The duplication of the square illustrated by the relative sizes of these two figures is minutely explained by Plato in the Meno, par 82. Jowett's translation, page 43. The old Masonic writers declare that the true system of the universe and the foundation of all geometrical proportion is to be found in the 47th proposition of Euclid, as expounded by Pythagoras, and communicated in writing by Plato, because apparently the ratio which those two figures bear to one another is calculated by it. Now, the microcosm whose body is disposed saltire-wise, like the letter X, exactly agrees with the description of Plato's Logos, whom the early fathers considered to be identical with their Christos. And when the microcosm or Logos is stretched crosswise in a circle, drawn within the holy oblation, the sides of the square surrounding his body measures 1,480 diameters of the sun, and the name Christos is numerically equal to 1,480. On reading the treatise of Francis Potter on the number 666, it is obvious that the interpretation given is founded upon some knowledge of the true meaning of the number, which it was not the intention of the author to reveal. For the explanations are very often more verbal quibblings which mean little or nothing. However, he occasionally commits himself to a direct statement, as when he says, following the interpretations of Rupertius and P. Bongus, De Numerorum Mysteriis, that the number 666 is not only the number of the beast's name, but also the number of God. That is, it is a number which God hath pleased to name and reveal to men, that by counting of this number they might find out that other number which it pleased not God expressly to name in this place, but rather mystically to conceal, etc. Page 60. From this we learn that by counting the number 666 we may discover the number of God. The term counting might very properly be used here to describe the process of finding the circumference of a circle 666 in diameter, that is, 2093, the diagonal of a square whose sides are 1480, the numerical equivalent of Christos, the name of God. Francis Potter does not count the number in this way. He extracts the square root of 666, which he computes at 25, 41, 51, or 25, 25, 31, or 25, 806 over 1000. Remarking that however the number of the fractions be variable, yet the number 25 is always constant and the same. The fractions curiously introduced may possibly give us an indication of the methods of those cryptic writers, for 41 multiplied by 51 produces 2091, a number which is only 1 and a fraction less than the side of the holy oblation, containing the square 1480, the numerical equivalent of Christos. The next fraction is 25 over 31, and the product of these two numbers is 775, or the perimeter of the holy oblation, taking the sun's distance at 10. It is, in fact, another way of expressing the number 2093. The third fraction is apparently the true one, but the square root of 666 is more nearly 25,807 than 25,806. The two figures include 3 persons, for the microcosm or lesser man represents the double-sexed creature whose bride, or the feminine half of his body, is fixed to his back. According to the Kabbalah, they were not always conjoined in this way, but were sometimes separated. In Caesariano's figure only, the masculine half is visible. In the case of the temples, it is difficult to see how these figures of Caesariano's could have been used, unless they were associated with specific measures. Therefore, we may conclude that they formed the canon or rule of measurement in architecture. Any measure of the universe could be identified with their bodies and applied to a temple, and it would thus become possible to canonize a certain number of figures which, for convenience and use, could be recognized as the sanctioned patterns for the practice of the architectural arts. Originally, the builders must have been instructed by the priests, and the rule of Vitruvius could only have resulted from a theological system based upon cosmic science. An illustration by Cataneo, the architect, in Architectura, page 37, who wrote in 1554, gives the plan of a Christian church disposed crosswise according to the figure of the macrocosm, or as he calls him, Jesus Christ. What Hippolytus, Refutation, Book 5, tells us of the doctrines of the Nicene seems to show that their creed was derived from the Kabbalah, and is a valuable illustration of its meaning. The Nicene were a sect of Christian Gnostics who worshipped the Logos under the name and image of the serpent. They appear to have been of Hebrew origin, for they took their name from the Hebrew word nakash, a serpent, for the serpent is called nakash in Hebrew. The numerical value of nakash, serpent, is 358. It is therefore equivalent by gematria to Moshiach, or Messiah. These Naseni magnify as the originating cause of all else, or all things else, a man and a son of man. And this man is a hermaphrodite and is called among them Adam, page 127. And to him addressed to him begins thus: From thee comes father, and through thee comes mother. And they say of this man that one part is rational, another psychical, another earthly. And they suppose that the knowledge of him is the beginning of the knowledge of God. And the Samothracians worship that Adam as the primal man, and in their temples there stand two images of naked men having both hands stretched aloft towards heaven, and their pudenda turned upwards as the statue of Mercury on Mount Silene, page 140. And the Naseni affirm concerning the spirit of the seed that it is the cause of all existing things, and is the secret and unknown mystery of the universe concealed and revealed among the Egyptians, who, after the Phrygians, are of greater antiquity than all mankind, and who confessedly were the first to proclaim to all the rest of men the rites and orgies of all the gods, as well as the unspeakable mysteries of Isis. These, however, are nothing but the pudendum of Osiris. And the Greeks, deriving this mystery from the Egyptians, preserve it unto this day. For we behold the statues of Mercury of such a figure honored among them. For Mercury is Logos, who, being at once the interpreter and fabricator of the things that have been, that are, and will be, stands fashioned into some such figure as the pudendum of a man, having an impulsive power from the parts below towards those above. And a Mercury of this description is a conjurer of the dead, and a guide of departed spirits, and an originator of souls. This is the Christ, who in all who have been generated is the portrayed Son of Man from the unportrayable Logos. This is the great unspeakable mystery of the Eleusinian rites, Hyacea. The above quotation is given in the words of Hippolytus, but it is condensed and is not quite consecutive. The numerical value of Ye Kaye, or Heye Kaye, is 830, or one less than that of Phallus. From the foregoing quotation, it is plain that the Logos or soul of the world, according to Plato, the Greek Hermes, and the Christ, according to the Christian Gnostics, are all one and the same as the Hebrew Adam Kadmon, who is the second person of the Kabbalistic triad. The Selenian Hermes, described by Hippolytus, so exactly resembles the lesser man found in Cesariano's edition of Vitruvius that they may be justifiably considered to be identical. According to the Masonic traditions, the initiated architects who preceded the Collegia Febrorum of the Romans and the Freemasons of the Middle Ages were called Dionysiac architects. They were said to have been instructed in the rites and mysteries of Dionysus, and to have constructed the temples according to the secrets thus imparted to them. And it is a remarkable verification of this tradition that the lesser man of Cesariano is depicted with vine leaves in his hair and an upright phallus, both well-known attributes of Dionysus. No one can look at these two figures of Cesariano without seeing that they are something more than mere anatomical patterns. In later editions they become so, but here we have clearly and distinctly a curious survival of the cosmic deity of Greece, copied and disfigured by the crude draughtsmen of the Middle Ages, but faithfully preserved and recognizable to the last. There is still a further means of connecting the figure of Vitruvius with the Christ and the microcosm. From a passage in the Kabbalah, we learn the following very curious fact as to the body of the king. Longitudo autem membri hugis 248 mundorum. Now, this is the only measurement of the body of the microcosm recorded in the Kabbalah, so that it is of the highest importance as a means of identification. The fact that the measurement is given in worlds is also remarkable. By the proportions of Cesariano's figure, we can find the height of the whole body by multiplying 248 by 9.5. But by adding Kolel or unity to 248, we get 249. And 249 and a fraction multiplied by 9.5 gives 2,368, the numerical value of the name Jesus Christ, or Jesus Christos, 888 and 1480. In the Book of the Concealed Mystery, page 46, the following interpretation of the first verse of Genesis occurs. And it made me think 248 is, I believe, Raziel, who is like the angel that communicated to Adam, essentially, the Kabbalah, or at least in the book of the Archangel Raziel. But the following interpretation of the first verse of Genesis occurs. In the beginning, the Elohim created the substance of the heavens and the substance of the earth. The sense is, 6 members were created, which are the 6 numerations of Microprosopus. Benignity as his right arm, severity as his left arm, beauty as his body, victory as his right leg, glory as his left leg, and the foundation as reproductive. For instead of in the beginning, it may be read, he created the 6. Upon these depend all things which are below, principally the queen. And that just makes me think again how in the Serpent Power, I believe, by John Woodruff, he talks about the first 6 chakras essentially as centers or chakras, but the 7th chakra, he kind of doesn't consider it. It just makes me think of the 7th day, and there's all these overlaps, and they're not necessarily meant to be overlapped in all cases. But I was thinking of it after the fact, but I mentioned that the upper chakras or the higher chakras in the last post, and came to find in just that weird, obvious, so I never would have considered it, but something just told me to calculate upper chakras, and lo and behold, it sits at 6. But again, just because it equals that doesn't necessarily mean, like, what does it mean? Because sits at 6, I kind of associate with the heart chakra. But again, just going back to post 45, referencing what I kind of grasped from that of the linking of the heart and the mind. Again, 666 has everything to do with the heart chakra, but also Hafren, the mind, and the Taurus hypercube. Therefore, it makes me think of just that link that activates in the sort of Shakti fire. Going back to this plasma like book, what was it? A blob of plasma. Wait, I forgot it. BLOB, a blob of plasma energy is 666. And so it's like yet another way to think about it, but it goes with the plasmoid intelligence theory and just all these different codes that I found. One in particular was through reading, like I had already read and mentioned in, I think, post 66 somewhat. Well, that's where I kind of go into Wilhelm Reich. But it was around then that I started getting into The Cosmic Pulse of Life by Trevor Constable. But then I found his older, like, first book, They Live in the Sky. And the phrase essentially that came to me was the elemental plasma technology, also 666. It's just a blob of plasma energy. That one stuck with me and I wanted to mention. And so just in knowing and laughing about that, like I'm going with this knowledge and like finding layers and layers that end up kind of making it too much to end up going over afterwards. So from this, it is plain that the heavens and the earth are here supposed to take the form of man, and it is no wonder that the Christian mystics of the Middle Ages saw in the Timaeus of Plato the same doctrine of creation which they found in the Mosaic Law. Jowett, in his introduction to the Timaeus, says, the Neoplatonists, believing that Plato was inspired by the Holy Ghost and had received his wisdom from Moses, seems to find in his writings the Christian Trinity, the Word, the Church, and the creation of the world in a Jewish sense. Which, whether you're a fan or not, just goes like I'm just going to mention Jewish happens to be 96, but that's not considering the S as a shin. But 96, like again, there's other ways you can look at it. One, I don't know where I had it written down, but I know it's dollars. Like mandala, well, like the petals, talking about how there's two generally petals of the Anya, but mystically there's 96. Dollars is the word for petals. Then when you change that with shin, it made me think of how dimensional is 330. So dimensional dollars, or essentially the petals being, in the mandalic sense, the edges essentially. I think the edges, the edges is 96. Just going back, there's like all these different things again that from different contexts you end up just seeing they bleed together. But what was I going to say also about? Oh yeah, digits. So digits is kind of like dollars because the amount of dollars are kind of like the digits of the dollars on the chakras are kind of important. They're symbolic, and there's different reasons for the different numerations. The microcosm seems to have been used as a pattern in the practice of all the arts. Geoffrey Torrey introduces it in some of the letters of the Champ Fleury, 1529, and Sylvanus Morgan, the heraldic painter, shows it on a shield intended to symbolize the charge of the sixth day of creation. It stands on the shield as the image of Mercury, i.e., Adam. He is surrounded by a lion, a hart, a horse, and a dragon, apparently corresponding to the four cosmic beasts of the Gospels. Armalogia, 1666, page 188. Geometrically, the diagram containing the 10 steps of the Kabbalah is shown by Kircher and other authorities in the form ascribed by Freemasons to what they call the double cube, that is to say, an irregular hexagon, which will exactly enclose a vesica. Consequently, its length and breadth are of the proportion of 26 to 15. It is said that the 10 Kabbalistic steps in their entirety the 10 Sephiroth, symbolize the aspect of the deity expressed by the 4 mystic letters Yod He Vav He, whose numerical value is 26. This number was said by the Jews to comprise the most sacred mysteries of the law. No explanation, however, has ever been given showing how the number 26 afforded a key to all the science of the Israelites. It is now suggested that the vesica, whose proportion is in ratio of 26 to 15, was the symbol of the hidden rule or canon. And again, 15 is Yod He, essentially the main root of Yod He Vav He, as essentially the father and mother, the male and female, but also unified. So it was the symbol of the hidden rule or canon by which the synthesis of nature was reduced to a comprehensible figure, capable of demonstrating to initiates the truth and knowledge which constituted the secret wisdom of antiquity. Bryant, quoting from Eusebius, refers to a very singular fish which, described in the language of hyperbole, is probably no other than the Vesica Piscis. Eusebius copied his account of it from Berosus, a priest of Belus, and a native of Babylonia who lived in the time of Alexander the Great. After declaring that writings were preserved at Babylon containing a history of the heavens and the sea for 15 myriads of years, he says that in those ancient times the Chaldeans lived without rule and order, when there made its appearance from a part of the Erythraean Sea, which bordered upon Babylonia, an animal endowed with reason who was called Oannes. According to the accounts of Apollodorus, the whole body of the animal was like that of a fish, and had under a fish's head another head, and also feet below, similar to those of a man, subjoined to the fish's tail. His voice, too, and language was articulate and human, and there was a representation of him to be seen in the time of Berosus. This being in the daytime used to converse with men, but took no food at that season, and he gave them an insight into letters and science, and every kind of art. He taught them to construct houses, to found temples, to compile laws, and explained to them the principles of geometrical knowledge. He made them distinguish the seeds of the earth. When the sun set, it was the custom of this being to plunge again into the sea, and abide all the night in the deep. Bryant, Myth, Volume 4, page 129. Apollodorus called this animal Musaurus, 1011. Now the two vesicas, whose perimeters are respectively 671 and 676, are each formed by the intersection of two circles, 1006 and a half and 1014 in circumference. Therefore, 1011 would be a mean between the last two numbers. And the diameter of a circle whose circumference is 1011 is 321 and 3/4, or the numerical equivalent of kalos, beautiful, and naos, a temple. A vesica formed of such circles, or of two such circles, measures about 482 across, and 482 is the numerical equivalent of the name rhombus. And if two intersecting circles, 1011 in circumference, be enclosed in a greater vesica, the latter will be enclosed in a square contained within the orbit of Saturn. Moreover, the English word truth has the value of 1011, and Oannes 1109 is less than the numerical equivalent of Microprosopus 1101, the second person of the Kabbalistic triad. Finally, the names of the three persons of the Hebrew Kabbalah, Macroprosopus 1101, Microprosopus 1110, and Malkuth 496, yield the number 2707, which is the perimeter of a rhombus whose sides are 676, the square of 26, the length of the vesica, and the numerical equivalent of the unspeakable name of God, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. The following statement of Plutarch may be compared with this of Eusebius. Anaximander concludes that men were first generated in the bellies of fishes, and being there nourished till they grew strong, and were able to shift for themselves, they were afterwards cast out upon the dry land. Cudworth's Intellectual System of the Universe, Volume 1, page 189. Another fish remarkable in antiquity is the whale which swallowed Jonah. It is called to Ketos, Matthew 12:40, 370 plus 598 being 968. And if two circles 968 in diameter are formed into a vesica, their circumferences are equal to the two diagonals of a square whose sides are 2151. And 597 is the circumference of Saturn's orbit if the sun's distance be taken at 10. The rabbis pretended that the mystery of the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, Tetragrammaton, translated Jehovah in the English version of the scriptures, lay in its proper pronunciation, and no pious Jew ever attempts to utter it. The high priest alone being privileged to pronounce it once a year in the Holy of Holies of the temple. Much philosophy may be extracted from the combination of these four Hebrew letters, which need not be discussed here, but it may be mentioned that the numerical values of the last two Greek names of the deity, Zeus, being 612, and Apollo, 1061, bear their proportion of 26 to 15 to each other, and the numbers produced from the two spellings of the name Dionysus are in the same ratio to one another. It is also probable that this ratio was also used as a means of expressing one number by another. For example, the word polis, a city, used as the name of the bride in the Apocalypse, has the value of 390, and a vesica 390 broad is 676 broad or long, and 676 is the square of 26. Therefore, the Greek word for a city may be taken to be the equivalent to 26, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Tetragrammaton. Again, the name Isus yields 888, a number which is the length of a rhombus having a perimeter of 2048, the diameter of Saturn's orbit. So again, this Saturn proportion seems to be a recurring theme. And the number of the Hebrew name Messiah, 358, is the width of a vesica, 620 long. And 620 is the value of Kether, the first step or sephira of the Kabbalah. And 666 is the length of a vesica whose width is 384, or the sun's radius measured by the tone. If the Greek numerals from 1 to 10 be arranged so as to correspond to the Kabbalistic steps in the numerical values computed, we find that Is, 215, Dio, 474, again, in the value of Doth, Trice, 615, yield 1,304. Which is one less than that of the length of a vesica, which will contain a circle having a circumference of 2368, or Isus Christos. And this triad represents the three steps of the macrocosm. The next six numerals are Tetras, 906, Pente, 440, Eki or X, 65, Epta 386, Octo 1190, and Enia 111, the sum of the numbers being 3098, and if this be taken as the perimeter of a cubical stone or hexagon, the perimeter of its upper face would be 2065, mean number between 2083, the site of the Holy Oblation, and 2046, the diameter of Saturn's orbit. It is consequently an appropriate number for the microcosm, who personates the zodiac and 7 planets. Deca, the 10th numeral, has the value of 30. And this number, denoting the distance from the Earth to the Moon, measured by the Earth's diameter, symbolizes the sublunary world, the cosmic counterpart of the bride. Again, if the numbers of the second and third persons of the triad be added together, their sum is 3,128, which is the width of the two circles, 2,083 in diameter, formed into a vesica. And thus are represented the two circles of the ecliptic and the equator on a celestial sphere. Pages 39 through 67 of the Canon by William Sterling. Certain adhering partly to these Ptolemy's measures of the universe, as if having propounded great conclusions, and supposed things worthy of reason, have framed enormous and endless heresies, and one of these is Colorbasis, who attempts to explain religion by measures and numbers. Hippolytus quoted in the beginning of the canon. Colorbasis, along with Marcus, another disciple of Valentinius, was said to maintain the whole plenitude and perfection of truth and religion to be contained in the Greek alphabet, and that it was for this reason that Jesus was called the Alpha and Omega. So again, it just goes to show, and it's a note, Colorbasis plus canonical equals 666, the number of forbidden wisdom. And so it just goes to show there's like numerous people who've kind of treaded this, but in different languages already. The book Materials for the Study of the Apostolic Gnosis by Frederick Bly Bond and Thomas Simcox Slay from 1919 is also very illuminating in the matters of the apostolic sacred succession as well, giving a lengthy exposition on the Greek isopsophy values, including 999, as O Apareto, the ineffable, or essentially God, and Theos Anakleletos, ineffable God, the hidden God, or the higher power, within, not above. FB, or Frederick Bly Bond, also has a book I have wanted to go into called The Gate of Remembrance, which gives a psychic archaeological investigation of Glastonbury Abbey, the publication of which led to his realization that gematria must have been utilized in its architecture, as it appears to have been in other monuments such as Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. This book also leads to his castigation for bringing up the value of 666 in relation to the ground plan of Glastonbury, the same sort of castigation which likely led to its ruin. In John Michel's 1969 book, The View over Atlantis, Bond's work is mentioned in addition to the geometry based on gematria, not only of Glastonbury, but also Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. The whole area around Glastonbury is laid out to a sacred plan, the key to which is to be found within the hidden geometry of the Abbey Church. It is no longer known for what purpose the masons who built the medieval Gothic churches followed in drawing up the ground plan the old magic patterns handed down within their guild from times of remote antiquity. Yet, as the work of Lesser, Bond, Critchlow, and others has revealed, this was undoubtedly their practice. In fact, it appears that the unseen geometry inherent in the proportions to the church fabric, or of the church fabric, also in that of the preceding stone circle, reflects in microcosm the astrological geography of the surrounding countryside, the magical lie of the land. Evidently, from the record of William of Malmesbury's Glastonbury, there was once an actual plan of the Glastonbury scheme laid out as a mosaic on the floor of the St. Mary Chapel, of which he wrote, "This church, then, is certainly the oldest I know in England, and from this circumstance derives its name, Vetusta Ecclesia. In the pavement may be seen on every side stones designedly inlaid in triangles and squares, and figures with lead under which, if I believe some sacred enigma to be contained, I do no injustice to religion." To what extent William of Malmesbury, who wrote his history in the 12th century, understood the secret of Glastonbury will always be uncertain. From the cautious way in which he refers to the enigmatic pattern on the floor of the St. Mary Chapel, expressly denying any heretical motives in mentioning the subject at all, it was obviously impossible for him to speak any further on the subject. 800 years later, the question of the mystical ground plan at Glastonbury Abbey was revived by Bligh Bond, who published in 1918 in his Gate of Remembrance an account of a message received through the medium of automatic writing, believed to have been from the spirit of a monk, a 15th century member of the Glastonbury community. It is quoted as follows: "That which the brethren of old handed down to us we followed, ever building on their plan. As we have said, our abbey was a message in ye stones. In ye foundations and ye distances be a mystery, the mystery of our faith, which ye have forgotten, and we also in ye latter days. All ye measures were marked plain on ye slabs in Mary's chapel, and ye have destroyed them. So it was recorded, as they who builded and they who came after knew aforehand where they should build. But these things are overpast and no value now. The spirit was lost, and with the loss of the spirit, the body decayed and was of no further use to us. There was the body of Christ, and round him would have been the four ways. There are two where ye builded, and no more. In ye floor of ye Mary Chapel was ye zodiac, that all might see and understand the mystery. In ye midst of ye chapel he was laid, and the cross of him who was our example and exemplar. Brainton he diddle much, for he was geomancer to ye abbey of old time." If this message was genuinely inspired, and no one ever questioned the honesty of Bligh Bond or his collaborators in spiritualist research, it provides an important clue to the Glastonbury mystery. Yet the trouble in which Bond became involved as the result of its publication was only less severe than that which William of Malmesbury had caused to fear had he betrayed the secrets of the Abbey geomancer. For Bligh Bond was the victim of a sinister and almost incredible campaign of distortion and vilification initiated by certain inquisitorial prelates, following his publication of the Gate of Remembrance. It was in this book that he revealed for the first time the psychic origin of the clues which led to his dramatic rediscovery of the foundations of the Edgar Chapel at the east end of the Abbey, and of other traces of the original ground plan. Frustrated and bullied, even covertly accused of invoking diabolic power in his work on the Glastonbury mystery, Bligh Bond was forced to resign his post as architect to the Abbey ruins. In his absence, his excavations were concealed, much of the evidence for his discoveries destroyed, and his plans altered and falsified. All this, it seems, was done at the instigation of ecclesiastical authorities, ever unwilling to acknowledge the true source of their own creed, or to acknowledge the existence of those absolute spiritual principles respected by the founders of all the great religions, from which the Christian Church derived its initial authority. Pages 129 through 131. Furthermore, the Alchemical Fusion, Chapter 6, written across the face of the country in letters of earth and stone, the cosmic knowledge of the ancient world is now within reach. It appears that in recent ages the human race has lost touch with some hidden source of power, some ultimate proof of cosmic order which inspired the monumental achievements of antiquity and produced the severe confidence of prehistoric life. Yet, even though the past may now seem remote and dead, all its accumulated wisdom perished, nothing has in fact been lost, for the geomancer's manuscript is still legible. The key to the whole system of natural magic or elemental control, on which the whole civilization of the ancient world was sustained, lies in two numbers, 666 and 2080, or alternatively 1080. Their associations are set out below. 1080 plus 666 equals 1746. The combination of terrestrial and celestial forces produces 1746, the number of fusion. This mathematical expression of the former science of alchemical fusion was retained by the architects of the Christian Gospels. For Father, Pater, is 489, Geos, Son, 680, and Pneuma, plus 1, equals 1746, a grain of mustard seed. 666, the sun, fire, sulfur, imperial power, Stonehenge, Glastonbury Abbey, the sum of the magic square of the sun. 1080 or 2080, Mercury, the terrestrial spirit, lunar influence, the Great Pyramid, Woodhenge, the sum of the magic square of Mercury is 2080. Tonuma Agion, or the Holy Ghost, is 1080. Crateria, or Crateria, Grail, 540, or half of 1080. Radius of the moon is 1080 miles. Side of the Holy Oblation, a 12th part of the Earth's circumference, is 2080. And To and Teknon Pyre, the fire stolen from heaven by Prometheus, is 2080. The analysis of Kabbalistic numbers reveals a definite association between the terrestrial current and lunar influence. Yesod is lunar in nature, the moon being the luminary attributed, inasmuch as a curious relationship exists between the Earth's dead satellite and the astral light, regarding the tree of life. The factor of lunar or stellar influence upon the Earth was expressed in the number 1080, often quoted by early astronomers. Hipparchus, for example, in about 150 BC, established the distances and degrees of brightness of 1080 stars, presumably the number whose astrological significance he considered worth reckoning. 666 plus 1080 being 1746, Kokos Sinapeos, a grain of mustard seed. In addition, 1746 is O Thesaurus Isus, or the treasury of Jesus. 1746 is also 2 Kekrimenon Pneuma, the hidden spirit. And 1744, Marguerites Sophias, so pearls of wisdom, or pearl of wisdom. Other biblical phrases of this value, which are each referring to the same principle of spiritual enlightenment, are given in Bond and Lay's The Kabbalah. Here we have a numerical demonstration of the ultimate work of alchemy, the fusion of mercury and sulfur. This was the work performed at the Great Pyramid, where the germ within the crystal tip, the grain of mustard seed, 1746, sprang from the marriage of solar energy, 666, with the terrestrial spirit, 1080, accumulated within the pyramid's bulk. The pyramid was the Egyptian center of Mercury. The place of the sun was the modern Aswan, Syene. Cyan, which name has the value 666. Hardly a chance coincidence. For it was here that Eratosthenes made his solar observations, as the result of which he gave the number 25,000 as the measure of the Earth's circumference. In England, Stonehenge was laid out according to the square of the sun to kindle the spark of celestial or solar energy, while Woodhenge nearby was an instrument of Mercury. Again, at Glastonbury, the Tor, with its hidden subterranean caverns, traditionally a center of initiation, was evidently associated with Mercury, the spirit of St. Michael, while the abbey was constructed as a place of the sun. This pattern is repeated all over the country, for almost every old church is placed on or beside a mound, and these little hills were once generally believed to be the homes of the dead, the haunts of ghosts and fairies. It was on such a hill near his church at Aberfoyle that in 1692 the Reverend Robert Kirk, whose occult connections were locally notorious, collapsed and died. Some said abducted by elemental forces. It appears that the prehistoric stones, which once occupied so many modern church sites, acted in conjunction with a nearby hollowed mound as accumulators and transmitters of a current generated from a celestial and terrestrial fusion. 666, the predominant number at both Stonehenge and Glastonbury Abbey, has always been recognized as a solar number. Its traditional character is confirmed by its obvious significance as the sum of the numbers in the square of the sun, and it is the number of Titan, a solar deity like Phoebus. Yet, although 666 stands for an eternal natural principle transcending any moral category, the more superstitious among early Christians came to associate the number 666 with an influence exclusively evil. Christianity was founded on the inspirational word of Christ, the Holy Ghost, 1080, composed of the male and female elements of the terrestrial spirit. Isus, being Jesus, 888, plus Miriam, Mary, 192, is 1080. Thus, in the proposed restoration of the New Jerusalem on earth, the Church, as the spiritual force, must recognize the function of a legitimate temporal authority, the imperial representative of the Son, whose number is 666. In the words of Christ, render unto Caesar things that are Caesar's. In the Hebrew language, the name of the Emperor Nero has the value of 666, and as Bleibond shows, this number was allotted by the early Christians to other Roman institutions. The persecution of the Church by the Roman emperors persuaded some that the number 666 was not merely the antithesis, the opposite pole of the Spirit of Christ, but that it possessed in itself some inherently hostile evil quality. Again, the spirit of Sorath, as it's called by Steiner, going back essentially further. But the Gnostics within the church, however, recognized the number for what it was, an essential element in the true cosmic scheme. And in laying out their mystic citadels, they allowed 666, the solar number, to occupy its due place in the numerical order. The famous reference to the number in Revelation reads, "Here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666." The Puritans and those others whose opposition to the old magical practices brought about the Reformation compiled their scheme to exclude the number 666. To them, the beast represented some absolute principle of evil, irreconcilable with the iron rule of humanly created morality. The beast, like the dragon, had to be suppressed. Passing the village inn by night, the Puritan minister took no pleasure in its lighted windows and heard no delight, the noise and music from within. The same attribute of nescient arrogance that rejected 666 for an anti Christian number and destroyed as temples of the Antichrist such glorious magical structures as Glastonbury Abbey, in whose proportions the number was prominently displayed, was also opposed to the festivals with which the number was associated. The feasts of Baal, the sun god, Bel, the dragon, the beast, however the principle is expressed, were held over the country in seasonal fairs, games, bonfires, and processions, and were celebrated in songs and legends. The suppression of festivals, musicians, and hostelries, which followed the Puritans' rejection of the number 666, gradually rendered the whole areas of the country uninhabitable. The people of the Highlands and Western Isles of Scotland, the structure of their social and spiritual life broken by the new tyranny, vanished or repined in helpless apathy. Everywhere the waning spirit left empty churches and crumbling homesteads. It is, of course, absurd to associate 666 or any other number solely with the forces of evil. No number in itself is exclusively representative of a moral quality, whether negative or positive. For every natural principle has its own rightful place in the universe, and its magical influence can be disposed in either direction. In any case, it is inconsistent to relate moral principles to numbers, for numerical relationships are precise and unalterable, while mortals are neither, being simply mores, customs adopted by general consent in response to the circumstances at a particular time and place. It is believed by some that we now live in a more enlightened age than that of the Reformation, better capable of distinguishing between what is true and what is merely expedient. Yet only a few years ago, superstitious fear of the number 666, on the part of certain prominent clergymen, produced the miserable quarrel at Glastonbury, the persecution of Bligh Bond, and the falsification of his archaeological records. The issue, which was never publicly aired, was this. Bligh Bond discovered by excavation that Glastonbury Abbey was constructed to a hidden ground plan, which consisted basically of a rectangle composed of 74 squares. The rectangle which contains the whole abbey structure is none of these squares in length and 4 in width. In other words, the rectangle measured 666 feet by 200 and the rectangle which contains the whole abbey structure is 9, not none, but 9 of these squares in length and 4 in width. In other words, the rectangle measured 666 feet by 296 feet. Ever since 1918, when it became known that the I don't know, I'm pretty sure I typed this by hand, but the something which led to this archaeological discoveries have been obtained in the practice of spiritualism through the medium of automatic writing. Bligh Bond had been regarded by some as a necromancer and lead with proscribed powers. He was thus in much the same position as Galileo and Copernicus centuries before, inhibited from declaring what he perceived to be the case, that the true length of the abbey was 666 feet. Instead, he reduced the length of the rectangle by one 74-foot square and announced the measure as 592 feet, or 74 times 8. Many have been puzzled at the bitterness of the controversy which followed Bligh Bond's published estimate of the original abbey length and have failed to realize the implications of the number 592 upon which he was so insistent. For in this affair he acted precisely in accordance with traditional Kabbalistic practice, establishing an apparently innocuous fact, whose implications could be understood by those who further examined the evidence. The pattern of sacred geometry which Bond detected within the proportions of the abbey and which Critchlow has lately rediscovered and extended, is entirely related to the fact that the basic rectangle is not 8, but 9 squares long, that the true length of the abbey was originally conceived at 666 feet. In 1645, Franz Potter published a book entirely devoted to the subject of 666. He identified it with the Antichrist, yet he gave 666 as the combined measure of the diagonals of the New Jerusalem and therefore an important element in the true Christian religion. The deluded utopians, who shattered Glastonbury Abbey for the Devil's Temple, and would have dealt the same way with Stonehenge had they known the secret of its ground plan, ignored what a wiser, more realistic generation had found acceptable, that a true cosmology must encompass every created element. The New Jerusalem is not planned by human architects and lawyers, and its elements are not selective, for they comprehend the universal scheme. Pages 133 through 137 of The View Over Atlantis. And John Michel has this other book that I found, The Flying Saucer Vision, kind of connecting the flying saucer to further of all these really cyclical, labyrinthine but cyclical grail-like cosmologies and mythologies and all of it. Another author whose work has been greatly important and enlightening is that of Elizabeth Van Buren, born Giulietta Elizabeth Van Buren, Verdon Row, February 20th, 1929 to September 2nd, 2011. She was apparently related to the 8th president of the United States, Martin Van Buren. So again, I forgot the one lady's name, but Laura Eisenhower comes to mind. But so yet another new age like president's granddaughter, but great granddaughter, but or whatever, however many, as well as the Italian Illuminist and Carbonari member Giuseppe Mazzini, according to the inscription on the inside of Refuge of the Apocalypse from 1986. Her books have much knowledge in them regarding the above matters and more, and I often wonder if she knew of Kenneth Grant and his work. It was through the bibliography of The Ninth Arch that I found a reference to her 1984 Land of White Waters, secret links between the Himalayas and the Andes. So Kenneth Grant obviously knew of her. Each of her 6 books are rich in information and have tons of illustrations, and despite having no reference to Kenneth Grant in particular, does connect in relevance on a number of subjects, from the Merovingians and their symbols to the ufological phenomena known by the ancients to be associated with Sirius and other prominent star systems, as well as our terrestrial cults and temples, which seem to have been directed towards them, figuratively and literally, as in the case of the Great Pyramid. In Lord of the Flame from 1981, the first chapter is about the recurrence of the number 13 and its stellar importance, being as it is a veil of the hidden sign of the zodiac Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, which is a metaphor for the hidden flame within, or the Kundalini serpent power. Again, essentially the germ that initiation develops. In this book, she also brings up a prophetic statement that a great initiate would discover the secret knowledge of the pyramids. Although the pyramid contains much knowledge already decoded, the Sphinx itself remains essentially mysterious. There is a theory that it depicts a deity, for the ancient Egyptians worshipped gods who were formed as half man, half animal, but every one of these gods, without exception, had the body of a man and the head of an animal or bird, whereas the Sphinx has a lion's body and a man's head. Then there is the belief that the monument symbolizes the evolution of man from beast, the conquest of the spirit over animal nature. And she says Edgar Casey, the greatest prophet of our age, stated that in a vault in a small pyramid which would be discovered shortly lay records and predictions for the world, in particular for the years 1958 through 98. He also foretold the return of the great initiate for the fulfillment of the prophecies. So, again, this connects to that book I mentioned, A Voice Out of Egypt. This relates to the book and work in general, which is referenced by EVB, or Elizabeth Van Buren, of George Hunt Williamson. I forgot I know it's Diabrinovic, but it's like Michael Diabrinovic. Particularly Secret Places of the Lion. Secret place of the lion equals 666, the solar value of the temple complex of the Giza pyramids also. It also kind of makes me think of the secret place of the Sphinx, essentially, as well as the place wherein the forbidden wisdom would be found when the great initiate is able to access it at the proper time. So again, it makes me think of just the 666 being a key to this knowledge in a sense. So like regardless of the physical location, it seems like just in investigating all this, the because it's a cyclical, like accumulating, crystallizing situation, it seems like uh just applying this, you can kind of get to it, crack that like egg yourself, so to speak. But whether George Hunt Williamson realized this formula is not specified anywhere in his writings. Uh, so whether he realized this, this code, it's not specified in his writings, though he was well read and extremely wise, so it is likely he had. Using the prompts from these books, I have effectively reformulated the ancient lost knowledge of the Hebrews and the Egyptians. They derived much of their secret wisdom from through Moses and others, and updated it along modern neon lines. Furthermore, in The Sign of the Dove, 1983, we see another prophetic reference. In The Secret of Mont Segur, we learn that there is a book in existence, a book that had been guarded and prepared or preserved by the Cathari, a manuscript which lies in a leaden casket in the depths of a cavern. This cave in Spelunca Adornata, the tradition states, a decorated grotto, is probably one with walls covered with paintings. The manuscript is called the Book of Love. When certain of the Cathari underwent torture, they admitted the existence of this book, known only to a few high initiates. This manuscript is attributed to St. John the Divine and is said to contain sublime teachings, marvelous revelations, the most secret words confided by our Lord Jesus Christ to the beloved disciple. Their power would be such that all hatred, all anger, all jealousy would vanish from the hearts of men. The divine love, like a new flood, would submerge all souls, and never again would blood be shed on this earth. It is said that this book will be found at a preordained time by a preordained person. Furthermore, it states in The Secret of Mont Segur that this predestined person, a being of perfect candor, innocence, and absolute purity, will be under the sign of the dove. Page 7 of The Sign of the Dove. The Book of Love is a metaphor for Liber Mundi, or the Book of Life, mentioned throughout the Holy Bible, which refers to the Akashic records of omniscient wisdom underlying all creation, the natural blueprint which the Chakma Nestora, or secret wisdom of the Kabbalah and Gematria, represents and teaches. The wall paintings bring to mind the tarot attributions to the letters that tell the archetypal story of manifestation and realization. The cavern is a metaphor not for the subterranean, but the subconscious strata, and the leaden casket, the body itself, or perhaps the skull. See the skull of the Templars. And post 58 comes to mind and all that that entails. The Scion calendar, the satanic calendar, essentially, of the Priory of Sion. Also, talking about grottos and caverns. Grottos can also be 666, and that's just another word for underground base, also. But yeah, subconscious is another way of looking at it. But the key to this book has been given in Revelation 13:18. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. This primary number is the very key to the secret wisdom of Chaldean magic. Kaf final, which, as Blavatsky states on page 517 of volume 4 of the collected writings of Helena Blavatsky from 1882 to 83, the word Chaldean does not refer merely to a native or an inhabitant of Chaldea, but to Chaldeism, the oldest science of astrology and occultism. And in that sense, the Zoroastrians are the true heirs to Chaldean wisdom, the light which shineth in darkness, though modern darkness comprehended it not, and the Parsees themselves know nothing of it now. The Hebrew Kabbalah is but the loud echo of the Chaldean, an echo which, passing through the corridors of time, picked up in its transit all kinds of alien sounds that got mixed up with the original keynotes struck beyond the epochs known to the present profane generations. And thus it reached the later student of Hebrew lore as a confused and somewhat distorted voice. Yet there is much to learn in it, for him who has the patience and perseverance required, since first of all he would have to learn Gematria, Notarikon, and Tamura. When speaking of the Kabbalah, the lecturer meant by it the universal, not any special, esoteric system, already adapted to a later exoteric creed, as is at present the Jewish secret science. The word Kabbalah is derived from a Hebrew word or root meaning reception of knowledge, and practically speaking, it refers to all the old systems handed down by oral transmission, and is very nearly allied to the Sanskrit smriti, memory, and sruti, the Chaldaic zend. The sign of the dove is obviously the Typhonian symbol utilized in Gnostic, Catholic, or Universal, and Thelemic orders from ancient to present times, symbolic of the Holy Spirit. Their key, largely obfuscated, feared, and ignored, is the central key that fuses all disparate traditions into a workable, scientific illuminist system of practical magical exercise. If but the true essence and understanding can be apprehended with it in order to unlock all others. Only by its understanding can the key of it all be used at all. As far as the revealing of secrets is concerned, most are guided by way of their plane and openness, and the perception level of the seeker themselves. Who is to say who may or may not reveal a secret but the secret itself? So again, self-secret wisdom comes to mind, the term by Herbert Gunther in Meditation Differently. Certainly those who show no sign of possessing said secrets are in a position of authority to determine for anyone else. The supreme secret of the OTO, which Crowley refers to in De Arte Magia, chapter 2, or the second part, of the importance of the secret, obviously refers to the secret wisdom, which is obtained through the understanding of this gnosis. This secret is the true key to magic. That is, by the right use of this secret, man may impose his will on nature herself. In this way, although all recorded knowledge were destroyed, it would be possible for an adept of this secret to restore it. Being particularly related as it is to the ninth degree, its right use lies in the ability to use the knowledge it provides as a door to the astral plane, where the solar lord in his lodge has the true communion to flesh out in Malkuth, the 10th degree, or the 10th Sephiroth, essentially the physical plane. The final 3 degrees, 9th, 10th, and 11th, can be thought of as the astral light or astral plane, materialization or waking or manifestation, and the other outward shell or objects. And the key sits at 6, and thus the whole Kabbalah, or the Kabbalah of 9 chambers, essentially the whole of its wisdom, which it unlocks, being the true secret of magic or sex magic, shows that seeing as how libidinal energy or love is the basis of all manifestation. Again, Malkuth and love both are 111. With astral etheric awareness activated, the will can impose itself on mundane nature through its self-same unity with nature. In the quantum mechanical interaction between the astral or etheric levels of subatomic being and their morphological representations of waking reality. The controlled discipline of various systems, such as that of the grade system of the Argentium Astrum or AA, is primarily geared toward the gradual process of waking up to more sattvic levels of being than the waking or uncontrolled dreaming state. And it is in this numinous, luminous inner realm that the supernals are accessed with the outer shells, atoms, and cells are invested with the fructifying life substance of the tree and the ego reorientated towards the true will, which can be a difficult ordeal if too far strayed therefrom. This key, 666, therefore provides access to the hidden gate within, the soul within, which reflects the dream of manifestation without, also the fractal of manifestation, centering around and emanating through the solar center of the Ruach, or the magnetic energy center, as Gurdjieff and Ouspensky have termed it. The word love has the value of 111, the value of the first Hebrew letter Aleph, which links with the Hebrew word for love, ahaba, which equals 13, a veil of unity, ahaba, and the 1 and 3, 3 and 1. It was Freder Akkad who provided the key to Liber El, as well as that of the egg of Ma'ayan, and the key of Liber El 76, essentially 31 plus 76 being 107, the value of Ma'ayan and Bixa, the egg, etc. And in the 107th year of the Eon of Horus, the egg reappeared to me on the precise date it did to Akkad. And in the 107th year of the Eon of Horus, the egg reappeared to me on the precise date it did to Akkad, April 2nd, also his birthday and the date of the sinking of R'lyeh in the Call of Cthulhu. And by the 111th year of the Eon of Horus, 2015, I had realized its significance and published a record of my initiation as Liber Mayan. This was the year I realized the full extent of my work and the significance in my realization of these particular keys in the overall greater scheme of the Eonic unfoldment as it occurred, and the verification of my initial initiatory proposition on September 9th, 2009, to discover the meaning of 999, which I came to find was the value of Liber Mayan with none final, as 700, after the fact of naming it according to my magical motto, for lack of a better name at the time. This is also that of the Book of Eternal Life, which again is synonymous with the ageless wisdom of the Kabbalah and the fundamental laws of the hyperdimensional matrix. The supreme knowledge, which I didn't understand the significance when I found that phrase, but now it's kind of like the holy science and the Sri Vidya, essentially. This ancient wisdom is still very much relevant to our modern crises and dilemmas. And being truly ageless, it has the potential to also be utilized in extrapolating and formulating the guidelines for future discoveries and realizations in uniformity with the existing and past and forgotten wisdom of Eld. A curious statement made by Kenneth Grant in the commentary to verse 559 11 of Liber Akbish in the ninth arch shows that he knew there was still very much to be learned. It was the motive of New Isis Lodge to achieve contact with forces beyond the ordinary geometrical spaces of manifestation, which resulted in two channeled texts, the Wisdom of Shilba and Liber Akbish, which were preserved and distilled by Kenneth Grant in Outer Gateways in 1994 and The Ninth Arch, 2002. 559.11. Zos embalmed her magic in a new geometry glyphed by the spider's thread. There is a drawing extant, Man is a Bundle of Ids by Austin Osman Spare, see frontispiece, depicting Klanda surrounded by the sigils and graphs of Spare's new geometry, with a lot of cones and which symbolize projection essentially. But this was the picture that Dr. Phineas Black was so eager to decipher. For its strange sigils, strange even to him, contained the secrets which form the lifeblood of this book 29, woven from the luminous body of Akbish. Is not the verse number that of all magic and of the Qliphoth, 11, both of which Klanda strove to manipulate? She carried the egg, which symbolizes the shells, Qliphoth, and we are told that the cipher O signified with the ancients the number 11. This is confirmed by the oracle, which totally void of correspondence, or is totally void of correspondences, in the Book of Numbers so far compiled at the time Akbish was received, and which still is. So he's saying 559 he doesn't have any values for, although when you subtract it from 666 just to see what it could relate to, you get 107, again, the egg. And therefore the geometry of what he says, the Akasha and the space gates, kind of, again, that outside the circles of time, the new geometry that the egg gestates, essentially, which also 398 is another verse where it's essentially empty, but he's like in the commentary, he talks about a new geometry. And I associated that with Orgon because Orgon is 398. And I think, wait, 559, is it Egypt or Egyptian? Yeah, Egyptian is 559, and then Egypt is 107, which Egypt and its connection to gold being 107, Egyptian gold would thus be 666. This last sentence comes somewhat as a surprise considering 559 has some pretty basic correspondences. And though the word prostitute, which is mentioned in the quote from verse 458 in the previous post, shows that Grant was obviously familiar with the application of Hebrew gematria to English phrases. Though he likely didn't consider, which he also did apply that to frog, but he calculated frog with a pay, which technically with fa can fit, but there's other little, like, again, it's just veils. The prostitute brings up the concept of the temple female, essentially, and the temple is female short of 666, so the temple female is 666. Again, going back to the origins of money and coinage. But 458 is the previous post, shows Grant was obviously familiar, though he likely didn't consider it a method or formula to be considered as consistently applicable, or maybe he simply hadn't found many of the values using this formula for whatever reasons. He increasingly, though, like with more liberal use of it, he did start doing that. But for one, it would be very difficult to keep such a database of values before the point when personal computers were available. And again, even now, my database is getting huge and like unmaintainable and prone to glitches, hard to update, like without updating, like I have to update the backups, and it gets confusing, but even with them, there still doesn't appear that many people. It still doesn't appear that many people, if anyone, has considered to do so until relatively recently. And again, even me, like I'm skeptical of it myself and hesitant in some instances, and then shocked by what I find. So there's like layers of, in addition to the veils themselves, which act as cryptographic ciphers or locks, keys if you know of them, but locks nonetheless. Um, there's like, for any of this to be accessible, it takes like the shifting of, you know, it's like a all the things inside of a lock for it to unlock the teeth. For one, it would be very difficult. So, my own personal database transcribed into a handwritten physical version and of merely the sequence 1 through 999 consists of 5 large books, separated essentially by like 1 through 1 and 1 through 199, just to keep them somewhat. And I stopped like updating that after a while because I wanted to put more and more database data in my database, and it was easier to essentially just use a computer, with little room for more than one page per number. And that's the thing, like to get beyond that, you end up just getting bogged down. But with the exception of the triple values, which I gave added space for. Note also that OTO prostitutes has the same value as the Scarlet Woman, 666. So again, I don't um, like the OTO really. Like I went there and I talked to Freighter Oz back in 2014, I want to say. And I just found that in a way you could just apply this to any member because it's just, they just, I don't know. I felt like it was like artificial. And no offense to Freighter Oz, who's now deceased, but I just felt like it was all like a theater, not really concerned for these like the deeper knowledge. So that's why I just was like, okay, I guess I can progress more on my own. But and he also didn't like Kenneth Grant and didn't even want to discuss any of the things that I had learned through Kenneth Grant. But anyway, the particularly peculiar value he apparently hadn't been aware of regarding 559 is that of the OTO, with tau essentially for the and OTO. The sex magic number. So yeah, which he claimed to be rightful successor and OHO of, i.e. the OTO, the outer head of the order. 559 has some significant correspondences relating to the new geometry referred to in the commentary as well. This new geometry very likely relates to the new knowledge. Oh, yeah, that's what it was. I wasn't sure, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was, but mentioned in the commentary of verse 398:22. Quoted in Opening the Watchtowers, as well as in New Symbols of AL chapter 2, verse 55. So the new symbols, which refer to the application of the newer English letter symbols to the ancient Hebrew value system, at least in my interpretation. Or at least in interpreting it that way, it unlocked a lot of keys. And obviously, there could be other interpretations, other avenues. I think that the cryptogram still has a lot of avenue. I think everybody who has a sort of like interest, when they approach that, anyone could find any number of like valid avenues, I guess, through it. 559 is 107 less than 666, therefore showing a multitude of relevant combinations. Again, thelemic is 107, so the thelemic OTO. Chemical energy harvest, the XYZ space, again, chemical being 107. Chemical energy harvest, also relating to essentially the theory of the pyramids being that, essentially, like a sulfur harvesting mechanism. The XYZ space, the mathematical subconscious thought, going back to the mathematical, whatever, the post 94, I think it was. The mathematical basis of psychic abilities, summed up in that sort of concept. The thought space, faculty of clairvoyance, being 559. Note 107 is also Oolong, consciousness in Tamil, and gold, the alchemical symbol of illumination. 559 particularly relates to the proposition set forth in the previous post regarding the subconscious posts regarding the subconscious Kabbalah, or the mathematical subconscious faculty. 559 veils the angels, or the angles of the space, Euclidean, or the angels essentially of space in the Enochian sense, as well as the quantum energy field and the fractal holons, i.e. the Sephirothic web composing the cosmic kaleidoscope. Relating to the OTO and their secret of sex magic veiled in the number 666, it is also the sexual radioactivity, or the biomagnetism, contained in and formulating the auric egg, again symbolized as 107 of the Akasha, the fifth element. 559 is one more than Hrilyu, also mentioned in, I think, the last post. Well, I know the last post, but I think possibly previous. But anyway, the orgasmic energy, in dealing with the nature of these correspondences as it does, seeing that it is also the value of a light worker, shows the practical nature of the astral light in relation to gematria as magical quanta. 666 is a quantum computer key, or quantum computer digit, because digit, as I showed, is 36. So it is essentially the quantum computer digit in and of itself. The God in the machine, inside a simulation, the looking glass, reflecting manifestation outwardly, misinterpreted as the false reality theory inside virtual reality. Again, because some people, they have this, they're locked in the pure simulacra, as I've termed it, essentially the opposite of the natural matrix, which is two ways of looking at 666 as essentially a cage or a liberating force of the soul. This is just what I see. Just you can equally lodge yourself or align yourself with either lodges as a Qliphothic inversion of the hidden occult light. Again, the clear light, essentially, or the clear way. 559 is also a biological life energy. So it's also a blob of plasma energy, which I already calculated, but I think that's what it was, right? A blob of plasma energy, which is channeled via the caduceus. So also, yeah, the caduceus is 107. Or staff of Hermes, symbolic of the Kundalini with its triple flame of spirit. Crowley knew of this supreme secret of the OTO and gave many references to it, aside from making it rather obvious to those with the appropriate degree of initiation. And it says from Aleister Crowley in The Hidden God, page 174, although I was admitted to the 33rd and last degree of Freemasonry so long ago as 1900, it was not until the summer of 1912 that my suspicion was confirmed. I speak of my belief that behind the frivolities and convivialities of our greatest institution, i.e., Freemasonry, lay in truth a secret, ineffable, and miraculous, potent to control the forces of nature, and not only to make men brethren, but to make them divine. But at the time I speak of, a man came to me, a man of those mysterious masters of esoteric Freemasonry, who are alike its eyes and its brains, and who exist in its midst, unknown often even to its acknowledged chiefs, this man had been watching my occult career for some years, and deemed me now worthy to partake of the great mysteries. With these he proceeded to acquaint me, and my life has since been devoted principally to their study and practice. And note, the Freemasonry is 666, as well as Freemason initiation, use the Masonic geometry, the hidden design of the universe, the pure doctrine, etc. Our order possesses the key which opens up all Masonic and Hermetic secrets, namely the teaching of sexual magic. And this teaching explains without exception all the secrets of Freemasonry and all systems of religion. And that's from Francis King in The Secret Rituals of the OTO, page 17. See also Amrita for the secret methods of rejuvenation of the OTO in life rejuvenation knowledge. The Amrita also veils in a way 666, just being Tao He, but take it for what it's worth. The mystery of sex magic, again, spelled out 666, is the eternal interplay that makes the supreme tantra of the dew of the stars in the womb of Nuit, forming eternally the one magical act, the ritual of the circle of Tao, or really the mutations of the Tao, which I always forget the Tao mutation, ever whirling into oblivion, or Zuo Wang. In Fundamentals of Tai Chi Chuan, or Tai Chi Chuan, Wen Shan Wang makes it clear that Tai Chi is always flowing in circles. So, movements in circles, again, formulaically aligned to 666, which is the circle, during the physical exercises is a good rule to take into account, being as it is an archetypal hallmark in mystical, shamanic, and magic rituals, banishing in particular, for parasites and clifothic forces of demonic fornication spawn from the use or misuse of conscious life energy. So again, these different ends of the spectrum, essentially, which is why it is very important to learn magical discipline and transcend desire. Which makes me think of how Kama Bala, love energy essentially, or like desire energy, Kama Bala is also 96. Many of our lower drives and impulses involve little deep inner deliberation, which can be a very destructive and counterproductive thing. True conscious self-awareness comes rather fleetingly when in the moment of fast decision-making, and is usually fleeting in the case of most biological organisms' lives. Although you can embed it so it can be, again, like a second nature or a sixth sense. The true secret of sex magic is not in any Kama Sutra techniques, although, as some have said, there are biological bases to the mysteries, but in the sexual radioactivity of the maximally self-aware and healthy living, breathing human being. The traditional methods of maintaining vigor while directing the magical will is to exercise mind and body weekly, focusing on the planetary energies of the days and their hours, going by the month or lunations following the lunar tide cycles and the psychic pull of the moon, and during peak lunar energy periods, especially eclipses, releasing the accumulated energy sphere at the climax of a full moon magical ritual, as the tradition of witchcraft has preserved in the magic cone of power ritual. This provides a means of working with the light and dark energies of the conscious and subconscious for the alchemical fusion to align and engage from macrocosmic planetary to microcosmic cellular levels. The violation that resulted in the wrong of the beginning and end, which when you add that end is what makes it a formula that I found, but was, after all, part of the fruit of knowledge which rendered us self aware, and one of the, and essentially creative too, but in one of the authorities or archons of Terra in the first place. This singular supreme value of 666 veils the doctrine of atonement or at-one-ment. So again, it makes me think of just that sixth sense being activated from the five elements in the body, essentially, or at-one-ment, all things magnified in their complex unity. Thus, 666 does in actuality combine both science and religion as the religious gnosis of mystical and magical union between self and other, and the unique connections and conditions, as well as the scientific victory over God. So, again, power over death in the last verse I was talking about. So, it's like a crazy concept, but again, it happens to be that it formulates in this number. Victory over God. That is the mission and motive of humanity, essentially, being invested in, again, in the Clephothic sense, being invested in the pride and arrogance it is in the eventual recalibration of the life wave of this planet under the transhuman movement. Again, Kenneth Grant mentions it as typified by the beetle. If we cannot form an organic transhuman order to regenerate the planet via the Tikkun Olam, or repair of the world, through the realigning to the supernal wisdom. Again, this ancient underlying blueprint. 666 is the cell of consciousness itself. Cognition, also, the function that arises, the digital consciousness code or mathematical consciousness. Again, all these things just completely overlooked, but not completely gone. So, supposedly eluding all these billion-dollar scientists who ignore and deny the ultimate science of scientific synchronicity, the undeniable evidence of which is obvious and unparalleled. Once you learn the basic formulae, you can see the obvious values without even trying. 666 is the key of the consciousness and the psychology of the human mind, which, if professors and psychologists really wanted to help teach their students, would advise them to keep journals not only of their lives and learnings, again, aside from a gematria database, but also the entire contents of their minds to the best of their ability. Not necessarily through lifelog technology, but simply in the interactive learning process of the formulation of language and its patterns. The individual would be greatly benefited to have a physical transcript of their own magical universe, which is essentially what a gematria database is if used properly. It is this once lost but now revived knowledge that will further unlock the mysteries of the ancient megaliths and monuments which have eluded explanation and understanding, as well as pave the way for new power systems and future technology machines. For within this key to forbidden wisdom resides the science and knowledge of the future, as it is the science of future knowledge, being the keys of human genius left occulted by the ignorant. And I mean, even if you try, like I said, like even if you try to talk about it, it further occults it in its own way. It depends on who's saying it and to who. And this digital Kabbalistic algorithm will become increasingly relevant as time progresses, and the overall outlook changes as the solar power re-imbues the Earth. That 666 is the universal key of the OTO and was revived by the Great Beast to Megatherion 666 in his incarnation as Edward Alexander Crowley, should come as no shock considering how confidently he associated with it. So when it's considered, you could say how confidently he associated with it. It is also the value of my own name in Hebrew, which no longer surprises me as I too have long gravitated toward it, and its gnosis for my own revelation of the further mysteries it veils under the sign of the dove, the original Typhonian zootype which the OTO, Gnostics, and Catholics still utilize to symbolize the Holy Ghost. As Gerald Massey says in A Book of the Beginnings, another Typhonian type was the dove. The name of this bird, in page 379, Egyptian, is Menat, and it must have been an emblem of the primal genetrix as it bears her name, both as Menat and the dove, or Teph. The Hebrew Ruth, essentially. The dove was the bird of breath or soul, the later ghost. An Egyptian statuette of the 19th dynasty shows a dove with a human head and wings extended over the bosom, typifying the breath or soul. It was a type of the goddess Hathor in Egypt, and it brooded over the statue of the Syrian Juno at Hierapolis in the shape of a pigeon made of gold. To call it a solar bird has no significance. It was the image of the gestator, the bird of breath, and as such is held in the hand or on the scepter of Hera in the act of visibly incarnating the soul of breath. It was the bird of the Virgin Mother who was the brooder, the generator of the soul, when both truths were assigned to the genetrix. Hence the two turtle doves of the Jewish offering, and hence also the dove of the Holy Ghost, continued in the Christian iconography. The Jews charged the Samaritans not only with the worship of the dove, but also with a form of circumcision dedicated to the dove. This was the dove that was synonymous with the sword, and the rite was the reproach of Egypt. Note that the transliterated form of Ruth with an added S, 60, gives 666, which isn't proper Hebrew, but it's just made me, like I saw him everywhere. I couldn't help it. And that's how I kind of learned what was kind of to be taken, like how to look at Hebrew and compare it to other things. But dove being 85, equating it to divine, is 581. Horus and saints less than 666 as well. And also strength, which I later found and mentioned in, I think, post 85, but divine strength. The dove, so again, another form of 666 being in its positive form. The dove being associated with the saints in a bird form of Ra incarnate. 666 is the chamber with the keys of the divine that unlock the Gnostic ecclesia of Gnosis, or Gnostic church of sacred wisdom, embodied by the true divine saints. That the Caliphate OTO is no longer in possession of the wisdom of these keys or the knowledge of how to use them is evident from their lack of significant progress since the passing of Crowley and the excommunication of Grant, both of whom remain unsurpassed in their work, and the need for others to bypass and surpass this stagnant order and create their own systems from the ashes of the phoenix. Francis King also recognized this when he wrote his now banned book, The Secret Rituals of the OTO, due for reprinting in 2017, which I don't know if that ever came about. I know that the OTO tries to get it taken down if you try to sell it on eBay. Sometimes it's weird, like when reading about a book or even somehow writing about it, it like activates the it activates the synchronicity of helping you to find it. But I found it in a bootleg, like crappy printed form. And then right after that, I found the original actual edition. And again, I don't know. I've talked about it throughout this whole journey of synchronicities with books. And I'm just saying, like, somehow after writing about this, I did find that book after finding a bootleg copy, but I tried selling the bootleg copy and they had it taken down. But my conclusion is that no group can establish any legal claim to be the OTO. Nevertheless, any group which works in the genuine spirit and can make the required contacts with the forces on the higher planes that are behind the OTO can regard itself as, magically speaking, a section of the genuine OTO. Today, many such groups are coming into existence. The publication of the OTO rituals will aid them in their tasks. For too long, these rituals have circulated only in inaccurate versions amongst tiny coteries who imagine they have some right to deflect the magical current that is designed to regenerate our planet. The work here laid out is yet still a mere conglomeration of signs upon the path, pointing to deeper and greater mysteries yet to be realized and applied in their full potential. These keys are accumulating to a point, a new system and order based not on temporal authority and external camaraderie, but internal and self-contained, self-explanatory secrets, not hidden, but secreted from the deepest strata of our innermost being to the outermost voids. The supreme secret of the Illuminati is the gold key of 666, which, when obtained, unlocks all doors and expounds all mysteries. It is both the number of beast, man, and God, and the evolution therefrom. When approached with fear and condemnation, it is a force of destruction. But if approached with wisdom and understanding, provides the key to Paradisos. Again, a better kind of spelling than the one William Sterling had used up above. Yeah, like this 96 connection, I'm still fascinated with it being the Ajna chakra, but then also the geomantic figures, essentially. Also the hydrogen of moon, the moon of hydrogen, whatever you want to call it. I don't remember exactly. So each triad is a hydrogen. He gets more and more complex with it, but essentially the sequence is 1 through 96. But this like ability, I don't know, just not ability, but this above and below connection, the strobo-dramatic nature of the connections of 96 and the Ajna chakra, the above and the below. I don't know. I'm just seeing this. The last post kind of orientated my attention upward with, again, that like emphasis of the Egyptian style headdresses mentioned in, well, shown, depicted in A Voice Out of Egypt, but then also kind of reiterated in a sense, not reiterated, but mentioned also regarding the aliens that supposedly had a meeting on Earth. Like, again, that's all mythology and I don't take it serious, but it somehow just, I find it fascinating. Also, so here's where, this is the book that the two owl is mentioned. Tuoi, Firestone. I couldn't find this, like I can't access it, but there is a document talking about it. The Tuoi Stone and Enigma in this journal. And it says see appendix, but it's not there. The Firestone then seems to be theoretically possible, a remarkable. Anyway, technically this word equals 96 and it's in this right here. It says to form. Whenever I looked it up, here it says similitude. And some of what it talked about, really what I was going to say though, is when you translate it, tried to say it means moon, essentially. In some places it said moon. So image and shape, mirror also. And so again, the mirror nature of the number, but then also, well, I guess it's time to wrap it up. The kitty has spoken. Um, I'm just trying to make sure there wasn't anything else I wanted to mention. I wanted to kind of read about this Anya chakra thing, but I'm all over the place, and I'll just say the brow center or Anya chakra is composed of 96 petals. Located in the center of the forehead, midway between the eyes, it is especially interrelated with the crown center. Indeed, in some Tibetan scriptures, it is not separately mentioned, but is regarded as part of the thousand-petaled lotus. In structure, the brow chakra differs from the other centers in that it appears to be divided into two segments, one half-colored rose and yellow, the other blue and purple. Probably because of this peculiarity, it is described in Indian literature as having two petals. This center is linked with the pituitary gland. Interestingly, this gland is also composed of two parts, each of which has a separate function. And so again, just thinking of how they link in the middle pillar, 1 plus 6 plus 9 plus 10 is 26. The 6 and the 9 instantly makes me think of the Ida and Pingala, which this kind of the Samhita, Shiva Samhita, also is important in explaining really like how it works. I just don't want to go into all that right now, but I'm just saying the 96 makes me think of that current of energy, just how 6 and 9, or which it's actually it's Cancer now, Cancer season, but the 69 is associated with Cancer, and also the sort of secret of sex magic Crowley mentions in the Book of Lies. I don't know. I'm just saying it makes me think of those two currents, which here it says columns or pillars. Amina. Ledbetter, his whole thing. I wanted to read this just because he mentions 960, and 960 has a lot to do with chronology and the timeline. But the harm to yoga philosophy that has been done by misinformation through the theosophist Reverend C.W. Ledbetter is indeed very great. Most readers of theosophical and occult literature believe Reverend Ledbetter to be a friend to the Hindus, but after reading his book, The Inner Life and the Chakras, I am forced to say, by the information he has given, he is the greatest enemy of yoga philosophy and has given a bad name to yoga. This may have been done unconsciously. Nevertheless, it is hard to believe, as in the chakras, he in no instance has corrected the misinformation made in the inner life. For example, in the chakras, he proves or tries to prove a difference in the petals of the different centers from that which is given in yoga philosophy. According to Reverend Ledbetter, all the yogis of the past and present, even the founder of yoga philosophy, are wrong about the chakras and their petals. All yogis in our books claim Sahasrara has 1,000 petals, but in one of his chapters, Reverend Ledbetter says he found there were only 960, not 1,000. So yeah, I wanted to know why he said that. I just, based on what I know about its like gematria, I was interested to see if there was a reason or anything, but the Anya chakra has two petals according to yoga, but Reverend Ledbetter claims he found 96 petals in the Anya chakra. All his counts are opposite the yogi's chakras except one. He claims he found 960 and 96. So again, that's confusing, but every yogi cannot help but laugh because there are really no petals at all. I will explain here the symbols these petals stand for. Again, dalas. So this whole notion of dalas just is, I guess, good to look over, but every yogi knows that Reverend Ledbetter is off the trail and did not stop to consider the origin of our 1,000 petals, but undoubtedly he had something else in mind. In yoga philosophy, these chakras are symbols. The first, earth; the second, water; third, fire; fourth, air; fifth, ether; and sixth, mental. The 1,000 petaled we do not call a chakra. So again, That's why it's absent in the serpent power, and it only considers 6, as it is above the nature, element, and mind. In these 6 symbols, we have the garland of letters, as there are 50 letters in the Sanskrit alphabet, and each petal of these centers represents a letter. In the first or root chakra, yoga puts 4 petals, 6 in the second, 10 in the third, 12 in the fourth, 16 in the fifth, and 2 in the sixth between the eyes. That includes the occult symbol of the Sanskrit alphabet. So for each dala to be a letter, or varna, by repeating all of the 50 alphabetical letters 20 times, we have 1,000, the symbol of the 1,000 petals. We would like to know just where Reverend Ledbetter gets his idea that there are only 90 or 960. Now, is he not off the trail reader? Now I will give you his own words about awakening the Kundalini. One very common effect of rousing it prematurely is that it rushes downwards in the body instead of upwards, and thus it cites the most undesirable passions. It cites them and intensifies their effects to such a degree that it becomes impossible for the man to resist. Them, because a force has been brought into play in whose presence he is as helpless as a swimmer before the jaws of a shark. The reader will find this kind of stuff in chapter 4, and in the next chapter he contradicts as follows. It is said in some cases Kundalini has been awakened not only by the will, but also by an accident, by a blow, or by physical pressure. I heard recently from one of our theosophical lecturers that he had come across an example of the kind when touring in Canada. A lady who knew nothing at all of these matters fell down the cellar steps in her house. She lay for some time unconscious, and when she awoke, she found herself clairvoyant, able to read the thoughts passing in other people's minds, and to see what was going on in every room in the house. And this clairvoyance has remained a permanent possession. One assumes that in this case, in falling, the lady must have received a blow at the base of the spine, exactly in such a position as and of such a nature as to shock the Kundalini into partial activity. The miseries and dangers spoken of in the previous chapter do not appear to have been monstrous in this case. So, for the Svadhisthana center, a 6-petal lotus at the spleen and corrects the number of the petals of the lotus in the head, which he says is not 1,000, as the book of this yoga says, but exactly 960. There is some resemblance between the account and the teaching of the Yoga Shastras, with which, in a general way, the author cited appears to have some acquaintance, and which may have suggested to him some features of his account. There are firstly 7 centers, which with one exception correspond with the chakras described. The author says that there are 3 other lower centers, but that concentration on them is full of danger. What these are is not stated. There is no lower center that I am aware of than the Muladhara, as the name root center itself implies. And the only center near to it which is excluded in the above mentioned account is the Apis Tattva center, or Svadhisthana. Next, there is the force, the serpent fire, which the Hindus call Kundalini, in the lowest center, the Muladhara. Lastly, the effect of rousing of this force, which is accomplished by willpower, yoga bala, is said to exalt the physical consciousness through the ascending planes to the heaven world. So again, kama bala, which I had mentioned, is kind of a lower directed version, but yoga 84 bala 118. Just wondering. So that's Ruach and then Buddha. It's said to exalt the physical consciousness through the ascending planes to the heaven world. To use the Hindu expression, the object and aim of Chakra Beta is yoga. This is ultimately union with the Supreme Self, or Paramatma, but it is obvious that as the body in the natural state is already, though unconsciously, in yoga, otherwise it would not exist, each conscious step upwards is yoga, and there are many stages of such before complete or Kaivalya Mukti is attained. This, and indeed many of the preceding stages, are far beyond the heaven world of which the author speaks. Yogis are not concerned with the heaven world, but seek to surpass it. Otherwise, they are not yogis at all. What, according to this theory, manifested force apparently does is this: it enhances the mental and moral qualities of the self operator as they existed at the time of its discovery. But if this be so, such enhancement may be as literal or as little desirable as the original state. Apart from the necessity from the possession of health and strength, the thought, will, and morality which it is proposed to subject to its influence must be first purified and strengthened before they are intensified by the vivifying influence of the aroused force. Furthermore, as I've elsewhere pointed out, the yogis say that the piercing of the Brahmagranthi or not, sometimes involves considerable pain, physical disorder, and even disease, and is not unlikely to follow from concentration on such a center as the navel. So it ends up not really going into this 960. I was wanting to know if he had a reason for that, or if there was a link. But it came up when I was looking for more basis into the 96 dollars, I guess, of the Ajna chakra. Because I believe there's something to this, especially having just found codes indicating it. It seems like, again, for a collective, lack of a better way to describe the UFO, alien, particularly the nature of the grays, it seems to heavily focus on the Ajna and this sort of cyclical, again, whirling, like hyperdimensional matrix, but synchronicity. I don't know. There's this connection between the higher and the lower. I don't know. The moon's connection to the Ajna chakra. 333 in particular, because it's selenology, the study of the moon, but therefore also the timings and all that comes to mind. This synchronicity in the this, see, he even says the shortest definition of synchronicity is magic. Magic in that spelling, 62, is Ajna. And that's why, I'm not to say that's why, but in my findings of the technology, which technology can be 260, which is that reflection but amplified 62. Kind of, I don't know, I just see them together. Again, I'm going all over the place. It's been too long, but basically I see the gray alien technology as Ajna based. But again, I really don't, I can't, I'm just getting that sense. I can't prove it yet. The secret of Yad-He Vav-He, or Sud, Savad in Hebrew, Yad-He Vav-He, comes up in this verse, Psalm 25:14, which is the secret of the Lord is with them that fear him, and he will show them his covenant. But it makes me think of how in the Ninth Arch, it specifically talks about the god of fear, Pan. The verse number signals the end of a series and the return again through naught to one. The oracle to Alloy is the crystal energy device, abuse of which is said to have resulted in the destruction of Atlantis. This was one way of reducing the one to naught, bringing to an end one cycle and inaugurating its recurrence in another. Real quick, just to read this also about, because Scott Rogo is kind of he's yet another person that had a mysterious death. that wasn't solved, but the status of UFO evidence is a deluge, not a delusion. UFO percipients show a wide range of age, education, occupation, and cultural background. They are convinced of the reality of their experiences. However, traditional scientific methods do not provide proof. In my opinion, the present evidence for UFO phenomena indicates tentatively that the Earth is the object of a survey by intelligent beings from some other civilizations. However, the evidence is not sufficient to determine the origins, purposes, and powers of these intelligent beings. The challenge of the UFO problem is to develop our scientific and spiritual knowledge so that we can communicate more effectively with other beings who coexist in this complex universe, possibly at other magnitudes of the chain of being, essentially. A noted parapsychologist, D. Scott Rogo, is presently lecturer in parapsychology at John F. Kennedy University. I guess that's fitting, but where he teaches graduate courses in the School of General Studies. He is the author, co-author, and editor of over a score of books and anthologies of the paranormal, including 2 on the relationship of parapsychology and UFOs. The idea that UFOs are somehow linked to our minds so again, the Ajna Chakra gains credence when we consider the people who had close contact with them. A close encounter with UFO occupants is not always a once in a lifetime occurrence. It often preludes what may become a lifelong ordeal of continued alien contact or psychic attack. For years, UFO researchers have been aware of paranormal fallout. Often, and they call it now the hitchhiker effect, but often a person who has interacted with a UFO will experience psychic events for years to come. Apparently, well, I guess the hitchhiker effect is when it affects other people, but it can also just follow you home, so to speak, meaning follow you around. Apparently, as an indirect outcome of his experience. But why should there be a link between something as seemingly unrelated as a UFO and a poltergeist infestation? Parapsychologists have learned that poltergeists are violent telekinetic or psychokinetic displays that occur when a family or member of the family living in the besieged house cannot deal with psychological stress. So, again, that radioactivity of the aura, essentially, or you can call it sexual radioactivity. That's when you can essentially add to it or whatever, like release it. But the poltergeist is projected, so to speak, when the person unconsciously allows his innate mind over matter abilities to run amok. UFOs, like poltergeists, may be at least tenuously connected to our own minds and may be projected in times of psychological stress. It is also interesting to note that some UFO witnesses start having psychic experiences after close UFO encounters, while other witnesses seem to have a lifetime history of psychic abilities. But if UFOs are only quasi physical, how can we explain their occupants? Strange as this may seem, UFO occupants don't seem to be truly flesh and blood. They have a habit of disappearing into thin air, walking through solid walls or closed windows. Again, the blue ball of light that flew through my window went through like it was nothing. And numerous other reports I've read, they describe not only that, but sometimes it's like a ghostly image of a gray in their room, like it's translucent. To me, it just seems like astral projection. My premise is that a UFO is often symbiotically linked to the individual mind that perceived it, or maybe linked to some sort of group mind. The UFO or UFO drama will therefore take on a personal meaning to the person who sees it. So it just makes me think the blue light comes to mind, but it instantly makes me think of, again, like if you were to just decode it in terms of chakras, it makes you think of the Ajna chakra, which is generally bluish purple. And for a long time, I've kind of linked the two, and then it's been in reading essentially further about through Raymond Fowler and the Betty Andreasson case. her abduction essentially started with a blue ball of light, and obviously, like, there's different people have seen different orbs. They seem to have different character like qualities and stuff. Again, I'm just speculating. It's crazy, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of consider all this as I move forward, looking backward.